Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Doomslayer was in My Hero Academia? This amazing story was written by reeleffendeel. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Chapter 22. Bloody Aftermath. Shores of Japan Public Beach. The sounds of the waves lapping lightly against the shore were drowned out by the emergency vehicle sirens as they raced down the street near the boardwalk. The beach was closed today, and therefore entirely vacant. A seagull soared through the air until it landed on its perch, a dead steel saber that washed up on shore. The gull pecked the corpse on its bare arm, eventually drawing blood. The sound of something emerging from the water behind the seagull scared it away, as well as the other birds in the area. The Doomslayer emerged from the sea, marching his way up towards the beach as the seawater dribbled off his armor. He glanced over his shoulder at Island in the distance, multiple pillars of smoke emerging from the floating research base. The Slayer stared for a few more seconds before looking down at his chest plate and tracing his fingers along the fist indentation he received from All Might. Conducting internal scans. Predator suit operating efficiency at 100%. Negligible, superficial damage received. The Slayer's mouth formed a thin line. The wretch truly did pull out all the stops on the Predator suit. Resuming his trek up the beach and up to the boardwalk, he passed the unoccupied concession stands until he came to the Main Street area. Just like the beach, it was largely abandoned with broken glass from shattered windows littering the streets and sidewalks. He guessed that the explosion from the sub must have been the cause of this. He spotted a manhole up the street and walked over to it so he could return to his hideout. That is until he heard maniacal cackling over to his right. The laughter was coming from a jewelry store with its windows smashed along with the sounds of glass being shattered. The Slayer marched towards the store and stood in front of the broken window to see 8 men breaking apart the displays with bats, crowbars, and metal pipes as they snatched up diamond rings and necklaces. They were all wearing matching leather jackets and pants. Vega scanned them and brought up police reports of them in his HUD. Each of the men was involved in armed robberies while 3 of them were wanted for murder. The Doomslayer glared at them hatefully. Bwahahahaha. The leader of the gang laughed. Take it all, boys. We're fucking rich. The gang grabbed everything that wasn't nailed down and stuffed it into their pockets. They were startled when they heard heavy steel boots crushing glass underfoot. They turned around to watch a man covered in green-colored armor walk toward them threateningly. Some of them started laughing as they approached him while brandishing their weapons and quirks. Looky here, guys. We got ourselves a wannabe hero. The leader mocked as a large, burly thug resembling a bipedal elephant slung his arm over the Slayer's shoulder. The other goons crowded around the Slayer while laughing insidiously as the leader turned his hand into a buzzsaw and held the rotating blade underneath the Doomslayer's chin. You think you want to be here, numbnuts? 2 heroes, Toy and Jack Attack, patrolled the empty streets. They were on the lookout for anyone who might have been hurt by broken glass following the explosion, as well as keeping an eye out for looters. Well, this area is clear. Let's go see if the flaming sidekickers need some extra hands. Jack Attack said to his partner. Right. Toy nodded as she tiptoed around the shards of glass. Hey, do you think this whole siege is over? Did the heroes stop him? Jack Attack gulped. He and probably everyone in Japan saw the Sabres televise their demands only to be hacked apart by an armored man with a chainsaw. What happened next was the most horrific acts of violence ever unleashed as the madman tore apart the steel sabers before throwing a severed head at the camera. A massive explosion from Island threw the whole coastline of Japan into chaos. The heroes and law enforcement struggled to maintain order. It was nothing but pure, exhausting madness for hours and hours. Once the heroes and authorities managed to gain some semblance of sanity amongst the public, several teams fanned out around the city to search for injured civilians or criminals taking advantage of the chaos. Well, communications are still jammed, so we can't get in touch with the police, the HPSC, or anyone else, so Jack Attack summarized before he heard loud screaming coming from up the block. They instantly ran toward the noises to investigate the disturbance, but as they drew closer, they could hear more screaming and several loud shotgun blasts. They were coming up to the end of the intersection when a bloodied man with a neon green mohawk, facial piercings, and leather clothes stumbled around the corner and fell to the ground. He currently was covered in blood and missing an arm. A civilian, Toy Toy gasped. She was about to run over and help the man when Jack Attack held her back. No, that's a villain. I saw him in a police report, he informed. The villain lifted his head to the heroes standing a few feet away and quickly bolted towards them with tears in his eyes, clutching the bleeding stump that used to be his arm. Help me. You gotta help me. It's a fucking monster dash. Before the two heroes could even blink, the brick wall next to the criminal exploded and a large shape grabbed the goon by the head, smashing him into a fire hydrant face first. His head burst apart from the impact, causing the heroes to recoil in horror. But then the smoke from the destroyed wall cleared to reveal none other than the vigilante himself, covered in blood and gripping a sawed-off in his hand. The Slayer dropped the dead villain and glared at the two frightened heroes behind him. One was a short girl wearing a pink, poofy poodle costume while the man next to her wore green, black, and white spandex, a yellow cape, and a metal bondo with the initials J imprinted on them. Even though they were scared shitless, it didn't stop them from taking their fighting stances. The pink fur around Toy Toy's hands enlarged until they resembled boxing gloves, while Jack Attack summoned jacks in his palms and held them between his fingers like they were shurikens. The Doomslayer raised an eyebrow. They were really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Put your hands in the air. You're under dash. The Doomslayer threw his super shotgun at Jack Attack, smacking the hero right in the face, followed up by running towards him and slugging him in the stomach. He caught the falling double barrel and smashed it across Toy Toy's head while she was stunned by the sudden action. As the unconscious hero crumpled to the ground next to her partner, the Doomslayer stashed his weapon into his hammerspace backpack and walked away from his would-be dispensers of justice. Making his way back to the manhole cover, popped it off with his bare hands, and entered the sewer while closing the hatch on the way. With no interference, for the time being, Vega restored citywide communications for the JSDF and HPSC. Once we have rendezvoused back at our base, we should dispose the bodies of the steel sabers you terminated earlier. The scent of the deceased will no doubt draw unwanted attention from the subway several miles above our base of operations. Once we have resolved that dilemma, we will begin the modifications on the support items we have procured. The Doomslayer nodded as he navigated his way through the sewers, following the waypoint on his HUD, all the while feeling very interested in the modifications Vega was talking about. Island. Several hours later, the midday sun shone brightly in the cloudless sky, the sea reflecting off its rays to give it a calming aura. Shame that Island didn't capture that sense of serenity. With their electronics restored, the HPSC and JSDF launched a full-scale, all-hands-on-deck reclamation of Island. Nearly every soldier, law enforcement officer, hero, and sidekick in the greater Tokyo area were called upon for this endeavor, and not a single one of them got cold feet. They were all more than ready to put an end to the siege and piled into any military boat and chopper to Island. Once they landed, they secured the airport and ventured deeper into the island. Only then did they truly regret their choices. None of them were prepared for the utter bloodbath that waited for them. All across the island were scenes of death, carnage, destruction, and gore. The most feared mercenaries in the world, infamous for killing hundreds of heroes, had all been reduced to literal human salsa. It just kept stretching on, and it kept getting worse as they explored the corpse-strewn streets. Then came another shocking sight. Dozens of pro-heroes sprawled out on the ground unconscious and beaten within an inch of their lives. These were famous pro-heroes in Japan or were top-ranked heroes in other countries that could hold their own against villains of all shapes and sizes. But here they were, lying face down in rubble and covered in bruises and wounds like they had gone 50 rounds with All Might. Speaking of which, where was All Might? Was he among the defeated? Did he stop the vigilante? It soon dawned upon everybody that one man was the sole perpetrator of these unspeakable acts. One man. But the bloody carnage all around them would soon become far worse for everyone on the island. The amount of blood coating the walls and streets would soon pose a potential biohazard threat due to bloodborne pathogens. The JSDF called in every hazmat unit available to Island. It was proving to be a near impossible task for the biohazardous cleanup detail, because there were thousands of bodies everywhere, and soon enough, scavengers descended upon Island. Hundreds of crows circled above the island like harbingers of death, while rats that managed to sneak aboard the research base feasted on the bodies of the steel sabers. But the worst was the flies. Dozens of the insects formed thick clouds of pestilence as they consumed bits of flesh off the sidewalk and laid their maggoty brood inside the corpses of the mercs. If the incessant cacophony of buzzing didn't drive anybody insane yet, then the smell certainly did. The stench from the rotting bodies and decaying organs created a repulsive odor so strong it was enough to knock them down. Many soldiers and heroes passed out from the stink, forcing the recovery efforts to be stalled as the hazmat teams scrambled to deliver gas masks for every single person and had to call in for more once they ran out of stock. It was a slow, grueling, morale-shattering slog for everyone, and it only served to hammer in the chilling realization that again, this was all because of one vigilante. One fucking man. After a while, an HPSC helicopter landed at the airport. Sayaka Grant and Mara Yakumura stepped out of the chopper as a JSDF colonel wearing a gas mask was already there to meet them. Director Grant, Agent Mara. He saluted. Don't keep us in suspense, Colonel, Mara sighed, in no mood for pleasantries. What can you tell us? The colonel gulped. I think it's best if you all see for yourselves. You might want to wear these when we leave the airport. He held up 2 gas masks for them to wear. Glancing at each other, the pair took the masks and followed the colonel into the main airport. The colonel passed large groups of JSDF soldiers taking care of or aiding the civilians who all stood outside. Entering the airport, the first thing the HPSC officials saw were dozens of pro-heroes on stretchers and in great pain. Sayaka's eyes widened as she observed every hero being attended to by paramedics. Every one of them was unconscious, but occasionally winced and groaned. Mara blinked several times in response to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. His focus on the heroes eventually shifted to 5 heroes standing near the stretchers. Sliding Go, Wash, Kesajiri Man, Yawabami, and Airjet all had expressions of disbelief on their faces while the Medusa heroine was on the verge of tears. Can you believe this? The colonel asked them, never taking his eyes off from the downed heroes. I've seen these brave men and women charge headlong into danger and always came out on top when facing a villain. To see dozens of them in this state, it's pretty damn frightening when you think about it. Even more so when you take into consideration that some of them are the #1 pro-heroes of their respective country. Who the hell is this guy? Sayaka and Mara knew he was talking about the vigilante. We're still trying to figure that out. Mara responded as he ran his fingers through his unkempt hair. Once the other countries heard about what happened to their respective heroes, it wouldn't take them long to start pointing fingers and placing the blame on Japan. How did the heroes get here anyway? From what we've been told, they got tired of listening to the chaos over here and mounted a rescue mission. Those 5 over there were the only ones who stayed behind to guard the hostages. We found them all looking like they had been to hell and back when we came here. The colonel explained. They took a pretty big, if not a foolish risk. On the contrary, I commend them for their bravery and initiative. Sayaka corrected. The colonel, not wanting to get into a heated discussion with the HPSC chairwoman, continued to lead them through the airport until they came upon the destroyed main entrance. A horrid scent assaulted their nostrils, and they stopped in their tracks, scrambling to put their masks on. They walked past the destroyed remains of a prototype construction mech and outside of the airport. Sayaka and Mara felt their throats go dry as they looked at the piles of bodies around them and the blood and guts covering the ground. Heroes and soldiers were moving the corpses into body bags as the coroners took them away. Sayaka was finding it very difficult to maintain her professional composure. She had never seen anything like this in her entire life, and neither did the heroes she walked by. She could see the anxiety and trauma in their eyes. How else would they all react to a massacre of this magnitude? It was the same for the soldiers as well. They had all seen very few tours of duty, and the only time they were ever called in was to aid in the capture efforts of an extremely powerful villain or backup for heroes. This incident was the mother of all wake-up calls. This is, oh God, this will bankrupt the world. Mara shook his head as the implications of Island's destruction started to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Wall Street's gonna go up in flames over this. One nightmare scenario at a time, Mara. Sayaka tried to remain focused. Treading past the errant body parts on the way to the central tower, they crossed the bridge while walking past the remains of an entire tank battalion. Mara closely inspected the melted husks of the war machines and took note of how there were large holes drilled through them. Sayaka felt her throat constrict when she saw several blackened skeletons amidst the warped metal. They made it to the tower after walking past more piles of bodies, more displays of carnage, and more heroes with thousand-yard stares. Sayaka paused for a minute when she looked up at the billowing pillar of smoke coming from the west side of the island. It was where the enormous explosion came from earlier. "There's been no radioactivity?" she asked the colonel. "The hazmat teams have detected no contaminants from the explosion. It's driving them nuts. They've also given us a grim assessment of the damage sustained to the facility," the colonel debriefed. "On an unrelated note, our eyes in the sky have shown us the entire island is covered in red." He motioned his head up towards the choppers above. Walking up the steps, the trio entered the lobby area of the central tower and watched as two coroners inspected the dead body of 9. Sayaka and Mara's expressions remained neutral as they regarded the dead mercenary leader. They would have rather preferred him to be locked up for the rest of his life in Tartarus. The colonel then led them over to what was probably the most chilling thing they saw today besides all of the dead bodies and gore. Scrawled upon the wall was a symbol the likes of which none of them recognized. For smaller symbols were dotted around it, and the two of them realized that it was all written in blood. They then focused on the message below. "Rip and tear. Jesus Christ." Sayaka muttered as a bead of sweat dribbled down her forehead. "I think it's safe to say he's sitting this out," Mara commented without a hint of dry wit. Sayaka's phone buzzed, and she pulled it out of her pocket, flipping it open. It was a text from Yagi. "I'm at the airport security office. Some people saw my real identity, but I know them, and I've already informed them. I need you here ASAP." Sayaka pinched the bridge of her nose and texted back. Mara, who was looking over her shoulder, sighed as the two of them exited the building. One massive shitshow after another. He bemoaned. To be continued. Chapter 23. Truths Revealed. Island Airport Security Office. 2 hours later. After the battle with the vigilante, Yagi implored those who discovered his identity to keep it a secret until they could find a safe place to reveal everything. First off, they had to remove his All Might costume and find him different clothes to change into. Mirio found some brown pants and a souvenir t-shirt from a crumbled shop. Yagi changed immediately, while Izuku held onto the hero's tattered costume. They traveled back to the airport on foot and secretly made their way inside, but bumped into Melissa, who noticed Izuku holding All Might's costume and immediately started asking questions. Yagi was left with no other choice but to bring her into the fold. Once they had found a safe, secluded place upstairs and had a sit down at the table, Yagi told the truth about himself to Bakugo, Uraraka, Melissa, Maruko, and Hawks. He told them all about his condition, the nature of One for All, how it's passed down through different inheritors with Izuku being next in line, and All for One. Izuku, Mirio, and Aizawa helped fill in the blanks with additional information afterward. The reactions of those present were varied. Melissa and Uraraka were heartbroken. Maruko and Hawk's jaws were agape, while Bakugo stayed completely silent, head hung and spiky hair shadowing his face. "Uncle All Might, I never knew." Melissa covered her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't want you to be targeted by All for One. I kept the truth from you to protect you. I'm sorry." Yagi apologized, further saddening Melissa. Hawks was quiet, absorbing this information as best he could. It was staggering. To know that the symbol of peace couldn't keep up his image for long was disheartening. "You know, of all the villains you faced, you never mentioned All for One." Maruko thought aloud, idly flexing her ears. "He's the big bad, isn't he? Your archenemy." Yagi shook his head with a tense grimace. "It was never a competition. He's a psychopath, a monster. After seeing what that guy did to us and you, I'm not sure which is which anymore." Aizawa rubbed his tired, bloodshot eyes. Mirio felt a small pang of fright at the Erasure hero's words. If a dozen heroes or All Might couldn't defeat the vigilante, then what hope did All for One have? "Back at the entrance exam, when you saved me from that zero-pointer, were those wounds because of One for All?" Uraraka asked out of concern for her friend. Izuku rubbed his hand. "It was more like I didn't have a good handle on it back then. But thanks to a support item Melissa made, I was able to use 100% of my quirk without hurting myself." "Sounds to me like you're putting a lot of pressure on this kid." Hawks voiced his opinion. causing Yagi to look down at his feet with guilt. Yeah, does this mean he's the chosen one or something? Miruko questioned as she wagged a finger at Izuku. This seemed a little too fishy for her. It's difficult to explain, Yagi admitted. The door to the office opened, interrupting him before he could speak further. Sayaka and Mera walked in while taking off their gas masks. Some of the occupants appeared to be hesitant at first, but that was when the woman smiled in relief at Yagi. Tashinori, it's good to see you're okay, she said as she shook his hand. I felt worse, Yagi admitted before starting the introductions. Everyone, this is Sayaka Grant, chairwoman of the Hero Public Safety Commission. Also, this is Agent Mera Yakumaru. Everyone, sans Bakugu, bowed their heads a little in polite greeting with Sayaka doing the same. Pleasure to make your acquaintance. All right, let's get down to brass tacks, Mera said rudely. Now that you all know about All Might's identity, his condition, and All for One, you can't breathe a damn word. Mera, Sayaka barked at Mera's callousness. Hey, they have to know how serious this is. Mera replied as he gestured to everyone. You two are in on this. Hawks asked while Miruko narrowed her eyes at them suspiciously. Giving Mera a heated glare, Sayaka sighed and seated herself at the table. Yes, we know of the nature of One for All as well as a select few people who do. Aizawa and young Mirio are one of them, as you no doubt already know. I understand these revelations come as a very big shock to all of you, and I understand your apprehension. Sayaka started, sounding as sympathetically as she could. But you all need to understand that if word got out about the symbol of peace would be unable to continue his duties soon, there would be chaos across the country and villains would capitalize on that knowledge. I know we're asking a lot from you, but we have to keep this a secret. Melissa and Uraraka glanced at each other before nodding at Sayaka. Hawks folded his arms and stared up at the ceiling for a few seconds before closing his eyes and nodding as well. Bakugu did not react. He had been silent and unmoving during the whole discussion, something that worried Izuku and Yagi. Miruko was very apprehensive about this. None of this was sitting well with her. The fact that this kid was a part of some grand court conspiracy was cause for concern, but the HPSC being involved troubled her. While Miruko understood that the HPSC only wanted to help heroes, it didn't stop her from being distrustful of them, especially when their last president was responsible for what happened with Lady Nagant. That poor woman. Was it any wonder she became a vigilante? Reluctantly, Miruko nodded her head before turning her attention to Yagi. You said before that there were 7 other users before you. Did they really all lose against All for One? Yes. Across all generations, he was responsible for their deaths, and One for All was transferred to only those they deemed worthy of inheriting it. Yagi explained. Generations? Uraraka parroted. But wouldn't that mean All for One is 100 years old or more? We have reason to believe that he has a quirk that grants him increased longevity, Sayaka theorized. But All for One didn't kill you. You're still standing. Are you sure you really can't be All Might any longer? Hawks questioned further. All Might and Endeavor were his role models that lead to his dream of being a hero. He couldn't bear the thought of one of them being unable to continue their work. Unfortunately, yes. After my fight with the vigilante, I can only maintain my enhanced form for 1 hour a day. He confessed, much to the dismay of everyone. I'm steadily draining away my power each time I use it. Soon, I won't be able to continue my job as the symbol of peace. When that day comes, it will be young Midoriya who takes up the torch. Cut the shit. Bakugu verbally and literally exploded as he slammed his fists on the table, partially blowing it up and causing the occupants in the room to scramble away from him. Bakugu stomped towards Yagi and roughly grabbed him by the shirt, breathing through his teeth. Bakugu, Aizawa exclaimed as he got up to stop him, only to be held back by Mera. Let him vent. The agent sighed. Stop talking like you're giving up. You're All Might. You never give up. You never lose. Katsuki all but raged into the hero's face. Why the fuck do you keep talking like it's the end for you? If you knew that All for One killed others like you, then why didn't you kill him? Why did you give your power to a quirkless nothing like DKU? What the fuck is your problem, kid? Miruko shouted as stomped around the table towards Bakugu to pry him off Yagi. Wait. Izuku pleaded, blocking her path. Yagi could hear the emotional pain in Bakugu's voice. He lowered his head and gently placed his hands on Bakugu's arms. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say except I'm sorry. I understand this is difficult for you to comprehend, but it's the truth. I won't be the symbol of peace for long, and I'm truly sorry you had to know this." Yagi comforted him as best he could. He lifted his head and looked him in the eye. "I chose Midoriya to be my successor because he was willing to risk life and limb to save you from that sludge villain. When no one else could help you due to the situation, he jumped in and gave me an opening to rescue you, knowing full well he stood no chance against that villain and had no quirk. That is what it means to be a hero." "So what?" Bakugo yelled. "You're saying he's better than me?" Yagi wasn't sure how to respond to that without making it sound like he was belittling Katsuki. Aizawa, on the other hand, decided to give his student a stern lecture. For a long time, he had been giving out warnings and reminders to Bakugo about his attitude, but now it was high time to put his foot down. "Bakugo," Aizawa spoke in a flat tone. The teen took his attention off Yagi to glower at his teacher. "Constantly yelling at people, blowing up at anything that displeases you, and boasting about how you're going to beat All Might are not the qualities of a hero." Bakugo uttered frustrated grunts at Aizawa, deeply scowling with his teeth clenched together before releasing Yagi, kicking the door open, and storming away from the security office. "And I thought I had issues," Rumi whispered to Kigo. Mera folded his arms, watching Bakugo stomp down the stairs at the far end of the baggage claim area. "You know, Aizawa, your student's behavior back at the sports festival has been a cause for concern for us, and some people on social media aren't exactly enthused with how he acted. I hope you can steer him in the right direction." Aizawa shut his eyes as he lowered his head. He was well aware the HPSC kept a stern lookout for students from hero schools who might go down the wrong road. Sadly, some ended up treading down the path of villainy. He swore to himself long ago that he would make sure his students, the children who entrusted their future to him, would grow up to be morally righteous heroes. "Are you implying Kaken might become a villain?" Midoriya accused Mera, cutting off Aizawa before he could defend Bakugo's attitude. "No, he won't," Izuku proclaimed, giving the agent a heated glare. Mera turned around to face him and held up his hands. "Now hold on. I wasn't saying dash. He won't," Izuku repeated a little louder. Uraraka, emboldened by her friend's conviction, went over to Izuku and stood next to him with the same look he had. Bakugo may act like a jerk most of the time, but he was not the type to become a villain. Not wanting to be put on the spot in a negative light, Mera relented. "Well, if you can vouch for him." Yagi and Aizawa could only smile, proud of their students defending their friend, and it was the same for everyone else in the room. Maruko had the biggest smile out of all of them, again impressed by Izuku's moxie. But then she remembered something from Bakugo's earlier outburst. "You know, shitty attitude aside, that little firecracker brought up a good point. If this all for one can steal quirks, organize villains, and kill all of those heroes who wielded one for all before, wouldn't putting him down be the best option?" Maruko reasoned, drawing a worried look from Hawks. Yagi felt his throat go dry. Apprehensively, he clasped his hands together and took a deep breath. "Yes, I did consider ending him." This came as an absolute shock to Izuku, Uraraka, Mirio, and Melissa. Did the symbol of peace just admit wanting to kill a villain? Maruko and Hawks were perturbed at this revelation, while Sayaka, Aizawa, and Mera exchanged forlorn glances. "After the death of my previous master, Nana Shimura Yagi began to explain until Hawks interrupted. "Hold on. You mean the Nana Shimura?" Hawks questioned in disbelief. "Your master was Titanus? The indomitable heroine." Maruko joined in. "That woman's feats were legendary. I've heard so many stories about her. She died to a villain 30 years ago, but they never found her body." Melissa recounted. "That's because All for One made sure there was nothing left of her to recover." Sayaka shut her eyes grimly as Melissa turned pale. Yagi resumed his confession. "After the death of Shimura and my continued training of mastering One for All I have ever wanted to do was to kill him. A day doesn't go by when I don't think about making him pay for every person he's killed and every life he's destroyed for his own mad ambitions. I had him dead to rights back at my fated battle with that madman. All it took was one punch, and it would be over. He would no longer threaten the world, and I would avenge my master's death along with everyone he's slain." He paused, letting his words hang in the air for a bit before continuing. "But I held myself back, because I was scared. I was afraid that if I did take his life, If I did allow myself to go down that dark pit, I'll never come back. No one said a word. Sighing, Yagi lifted his shirt to reveal the scar he received from All for One to everyone. I hesitated. I may have crippled and blinded him, but it wasn't enough to kill him. And now I'm paying for it every single day. It was quiet for a long time as some of the occupants processed this stunning confession from the #1 hero. It was almost too much to take in after the horrors they endured last night. Hawks was the most conflicted out of the group, his normally aloof expression tense. He looked at Izuku, noticing the boy's distant, troubled expression, and felt nothing but pity for him. Midoriya, are you sure you still want to go through with all this? Hawks questioned him, wanting to know if this kid understood the risks. Yes, Izuku replied without giving it a second thought. All my life I've dreamed about being a hero. I'm not going to run away from this, and I won't let the LOV threaten any more lives. But he'll be given proper training and guidance, I assure you. Yagi said, he's still in school, and we fully intend to ensure he finishes his 4-year tenure at UA. I'm not going to send a child after All for One. The next time I do square off against him, I'll finish it for real this time. Again, it was disturbing for some to hear All Might say right into their faces that he was going to kill a villain. It was like they were looking at a completely different person. As disheartening as it was to hear this from the symbol of peace, they slowly accepted that All for One was too dangerous to be left alone or alive. It was a grim affirmation, but they slowly nodded in response. Sayaka and Mara knew that it was hard for them all to accept, but it was a necessary precaution to prevent mass panic. Right? Now that we got all that out of the way, do any of you have any useful intel you can share with us? The HPSC has been in the dark for quite a while. The students, Melissa, and the two heroes shifted uncomfortably. Where do they even begin? Mirio cleared his throat, announcing that he would start first. For starters, the Steel Sabers were working with the League of Villains. From what you told us about All for One, I think we can assume that he hired them. Mirio debriefed. I see. Sayaka murmured as she looked down at her feet. She and Mara should have known AFO would target Island somewhere down the road. He probably spearheaded this assault to steal this island's inventions. Yeah, that's right. Izuku nodded. They were after a support item called the Quirk Amplification Headset. Sayaka and Mara's eyes slowly widened when they heard him say that. They distinctly remembered David Shield presenting the invention to them in secret, but they declined to use the device out of concern for possible side effects it could have had on One for All. The risk was simply too great, and Sayaka ordered production of any future models of the headset shut down permanently. But how did AFO know about the headset? An information leak or a possible spy within the HPSC? Amplification. Yagi pondered to himself before asking Izuku. It could strengthen a quirk. Bingo. Maruko confirmed as she propped her legs up on the table. But it ain't pretty. You ever see what happens to a guy after he dopes himself up on too much trigger? Try to imagine that, but worse. Izuku, Uraraka, Mirio, and Melissa shuddered at the memory of Wolfram going ballistic. Yagi and Aizawa were no strangers to how dangerous that drug was. They had fought many villains who were hopped up on the drug, and while it made their quirks stronger, it also caused their powers to go completely haywire with little control over themselves. The after effects were just as grisly, having seen those who were addicted to that steroid cocktail be reduced to bedridden husks. Sayaka and Mara were silent but tense. Rumi's claim of the headband's similarities to the effects of trigger validated every misgiving they had about David's invention. On top of all that, the League was going to gas everyone on the island with VX. That way there would be no witnesses and no one to reveal that the LOV was working with the Sabers. Hawks finished. God, Aizawa muttered, shaking his head as Yagi scowled angrily. Only All for One was capable of something so horrific. Where is the WMD now? Sayaka inquired gravely. The United Nations had fought tooth and nail to destroy every last trace of that heinous weapon, and she was going to make sure it would be the last anyone would see or hear of it. Izuku nervously pointed to a large briefcase in the corner of the room. Sayaka and Mara started to sweat a little, while Maruko and Hawks scooched their chairs away as much as they could. Is that still armed? Mara gulped. Don't worry, Melissa disarmed it. It's not a threat to anyone anymore. Uraraka calmed him down. About that, I was given instructions on how to deactivate it. Melissa pointed out. Someone kept contacting us on our phones and giving us instructions. She's right. Whoever this person was, he directed us to stop the League and even gave us directions to where they were trying to leave. Mirio further explained, "We think this mystery contact was in cahoots with the vigilante." Quick question, did this contact have a robot voice and sounded like a college professor? Did a symbol or jingle pop on a screen anytime he called? Maruko asked out of the blue. It didn't take long for her and Hanks to start connecting the dots on who it was. Yes? He was really polite. Izuku brought a finger up to his chin, remembering the helpful advice the contact gave him and his friends, and the sobering lecture he gave him. Well, we talked to him too, and this part is going to throw you all in for one hell of a loop. You were talking to an AI that speaks for our heavily armed friend, Hawks revealed, much to the surprise of everyone in the room. An artificial intelligence. Izuku exclaimed in disbelief. We were talking to a computer program the whole time. Oh my god, that was what hacked us earlier. Sayaka slumped in her seat with her hand against her head. The HPSC was hacked. Aizawa repeated, an incredulous look on his face. Several hours ago, we received a call from the Prime Minister during the Vigilantes' assault. He listed the no-fly order and tasked us along with the JSDF to launch a counteroffensive on Island. But we were hacked by that AI you all mentioned before we could do so. It blocked off all communications and told us not to interfere with the vigilante. Sayaka explained to the group, our surveillance satellite has been scrambled beyond repair. Mara huffed, hands in his pockets. 3.5 billion yen worth of hardware straight down the fucking toilet. But now that we know it was an AI program, we can rule out the possibility of foreign interference or an overweight computer hacker living in his mother's garage. Everyone's sweat dropped at that last statement. Is there a chance that this program could be sentient? Yagi wondered. Funny thing, it just confirmed to us that it is sentient a while ago. Hawks answered. This made everyone a tad worried. The only thing that counted for actual sentient AI nowadays were medical robots or practice villain bots at UA, but they followed a set of predetermined orders. They were designed not to evolve beyond their programming, but apparently, the vigilante had the first artificial intelligence that could think for itself. Our vigilante's packing serious tech and heat. Mara rubbed his chin. How did a maniac like him get his hands on that kind of equipment? Miruko lowered her head a little, tapping her finger on her knee. She thought back to how the vigilante saved her life twice, as well as the dozens of civilians he rescued. Not to mention protecting Izuku's friends back up on the roof, and saving All Might from that explosion earlier. Rumi still couldn't figure out what was going on in that guy's head, but figured it would be best to let everyone know. He's not a complete manic. He saved my life twice, patched me up, and rescued dozens of hostages. Call me crazy, but I think there's a heart underneath all that armor and heavy ordnance. Maruko spoke, earning confused looks from those present. I second that. Hawk smiled. The AI told us that the Sabers were stalling for time, so they could steal any support items they could get their hands on and kill everyone afterward. The vigilante knew that, and he bulldozed through us so he could stop them himself. This guy came here to save people. There was an air of uncertainty in the room, and everyone slowly digested the info the heroes gave them. It was hard to believe that a man who single-handedly slaughtered the most feared mercenary company in the world and fought off multiple pro-heroes and All Might came here specifically to help innocent lives. What that man did to the Sabers wasn't heroism, but he did save the hostages, something a hero would do. It was hard for them to understand why he did the wrong thing, but did the right thing at the same time. Perhaps we can discuss the vigilante at another time. I want to know how the Steel Sabers took over Island. Sayaka announced. It does seem strange how they were able to pull this off. Mirio wondered. Island is one of the most heavily guarded facilities in the world. Mounting an attack of this scale would be borderline impossible. Yagi cupped his chin. The only way the Sabers and the LOV could have coordinated this takeover was if they either had a way to disable the security systems or if they had someone on the inside dash. Samuel Abraham. Melissa cut him off. Everyone turned their heads over to her, the young woman's eyes obscured by her hair drooping over them. The League paid him to give them blueprints of support items, and he gave them everything they needed to invade the island. He was my father's friend just for money. Yagi and Izuku gasped in shock. The symbol of peace and known Samuel for years, while Izuku remembered his first meeting with him yesterday as being cordial and pleasant. But my father, Melissa began, her shoulders shaking and her voice beginning to waver. He planned to hack the security system and bring in actors posing as villains to make it look like a siege so he could get inside the vault and get the headset. But he didn't know Sam was working with the League, and he ended up getting the steel sabers instead. Yagi stumbled backward. It was like a dagger had been plunged into his heart. Izuku was just as horrified as his mentor, bringing a hand up to his face and clasping it over his mouth. Sayaka and Mera were stunned to hear that the foremost inventor of dozens of support items in recent years was partially responsible for the siege of Island. The rest of the group shared the same feeling of surprise, but that soon turned to pity when they witnessed tears rolling down Melissa's face. He was going to put everyone in danger, just so he could get some stupid invention that was too dangerous. I think he even knew just how bad the effects were. Melissa continued, but her tone of voice was steadily becoming heated. Melissa, hold on. Yagi quickly went over to her with his hands held up placatingly. David wasn't thinking straight. What if the vigilante never came here? Do you have any idea how many people could have died because of what he tried to do? You, Izuku, and everyone else would have been dead by now. Melissa yelled, gripping her arms. Melissa, I could have died. He was going to put his own daughter in danger just to get a support item that never would have worked. She screamed at him, lifting her head to reveal her tear-stricken eyes. Melissa darted past Yagi and out of the room, running towards the stairwell. Izuku numbly stood where he was with a sorrowful look, cursing himself for not speaking up sooner. After a period of regretful silence, Sayaka stood up. I appreciate all that you've told us, but now I think it's time you all go back downstairs and collect yourselves before they transport you back to the mainland. Some of you need medical attention, she recommended, nodding to Maruko and Hawks. Still sporting forlorn frowns, the students and the two heroes slowly vacated the room with an air of misery and sympathy. This now left only Sayaka, Mera, Yagi, and Aizawa as the only occupants in the security office. Yagi suddenly grabbed the table and in a fit of rage, flipped it over with a furious yell. The table clattered to the floor as Yagi took in several deep breaths, his eyes quivering in anger over the entirety of the situation with David. He felt a hand gently place itself on his shoulder and turned his head around to see Aizawa with a calm expression. Despite the Erasure hero appearing stoic, Yagi could see the empathy in his eyes. Yagi's previous look of anger morphed into one of anguish before burying his face into his hands and seating himself down in a chair. Half-choked sobs welled up from Yagi's throat, the hero devastated over the path his friend took. Mera and Sayaka said nothing and let Aizawa comfort his hurting friend. The emotional trauma this island was afflicted with hadn't left them unscathed. Mizuta Fuibara Shiozaki residence. Sweeping the last of the broken glass into a dustpan, Ibara dumped the shards into a small wastebasket and sat herself down on her bed. She took a deep breath and stared down at her lap. The last couple of hours had been incredibly hectic. After hearing the news on television that the Steel Saber took over Island, Ibara spent the last couple of hours praying for the safety of the hostages. Then there was another report of how a man in green armor beat up several pro-heroes and swam all the way over to Island. When the Steel Sabers hijacked the airwaves and broadcasted their demands, the armored man butchered them in ways she couldn't even begin to describe. After a while, there was until a gigantic explosion from the island shattered every window in their house, as well as the ones in her neighborhood. She spent the last several hours huddled with her parents on the sofa, watching the news report of gunfire and explosions coming from Island. They didn't sleep that night. When morning finally came, they went to work cleaning up the broken glass all around their house. Her parents had left the house nary a few minutes ago to check up on their neighbors or anyone else they knew in their area. This left her to clean up the rest of the glass in her room. Shiozaki sat still as a statue as the evening sun shone through her open window, a light breeze flowing against her thorny, vine-like hair. Her fangs scrunched up against her wool skirt as a knot formed in her stomach. Glancing towards her cell phone sitting on her dresser, and turned it on. She saw that her texts were bombarded with her classmates asking if she was okay, making a mental note to call them back. She scrolled through her photo until she came upon what she was looking for, a video she recorded a few days ago when she went to get some groceries for dinner. She pressed play. The video showed the dark clouds suddenly forming in the night sky as they grew in intensity, followed by a thunderclap. Then, out of thin air, a shimmering portal opened up in the sky above the clouds, and the shape of a person was flung down from the portal. The being fell from the sky and landed near an apartment complex, just as the clouds and portal disappeared like they weren't even there. Ibra watched herself run as fast as she could until she arrived at the complex across the street. She hid behind a corner and held up her phone to record a tall man sitting himself up from the small crater near the apartment and taking in his surroundings. A boy and presumably his mother, whom Ibra recognized as Azuka Midoriya of Class 1A, ran out of the building to see he was all right. The man walked off without a word, prompting Ibra to end the clip. Ever since that night when she returned home, Ibra was in a constant state of confusion and uncertainty over what she witnessed. Then afterward, she heard that the man was sighted at the mall and tore off the arm of the leader of the League of Villains targeting Class 1A. And now that man had stormed Island, fighting the Steel Sabers. The news reports were still in a frenzy. Not a single one knew what had happened on the island so far. Her free hand reached up to her chest, feeling her rapidly beating heart. This could not be natural. This was not a mere coincidence. Ibra turned her head over to a painted picture of her Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, hanging on the wall with a traditional Christian cross hanging below the picture frame. Getting up from her bed, Ibra went over to the picture, knelt down on her knees, and clasped her hands together in prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, is this a sign? To be continued. Chapter 24. Scum and Villainy. Muzutafu. The sound of feet crushing shattered glass broke the silence of the deserted streets. A man wearing a long black trench coat and matching fedora tried to avoid the glass all over the sidewalk, but there was so much that it was borderline impossible. The stranger continued to trek throughout the empty section of Muzutafu while taking in the chaos around him. The citizens had either evacuated to designated emergency centers or stayed indoors. As he rubbed his chin, his phone cell started to buzz, and he reached into his pocket to pull it out. It was a text message from one of his contacts, Curator. He hit a button to read the text. The mission was a failure. The vigilante destroyed the entirety of the Steel Sabers organization. We were unable to retrieve the quirk amplification headset, and the VX gas rocket has been disarmed. Wolfram and the others are now presumed dead. We were forced to scrub the mission and retreat from my island. We are heading back to All for One as we speak. Return to Kamino and inform the rest of the League. Didn't think you of all people would fuck this up, he said to himself before pocketing his phone. He picked up the pace down the sidewalk until a police siren announced its arrival. The stranger came to a halt as the police car parked itself next to the sidewalk, and one of the officers got out of the car. Excuse me, sir? Are you lost? Do you need help? A blonde policewoman helpfully asked. Her partner, an officer with a plaid-colored skin complexion, leaned out the diver window. The stranger clicked his tongue in annoyance before turning around with his fedora tipped downward to conceal most of his face. Why, everything is just dandy, officers, he greeted in a jovial tone. I was just on my way to my buddy's apartment to check up on him. Enjoy the rest of your day, he cordially dismissed as he turned around to leave. The cops looked at each other, concerned with the man's apparent dissociation from the destruction around him. Are you sure? We can give you a hand, the other officer offered. Really, I'm completely fine, the man assured them with his back turned. You should go resume your patrols or grab a donut, whatever you cops do. He waved them off and went down the sidewalk. The officers were becoming very suspicious of this man, and their gut instincts were telling them to investigate further. Excuse me, sir, the officer with blonde hair repeated, but this time in a demanding tone. This caused the man to stop in his tracks. We highly advise that you let us escort you to the nearest emergency center instead. It's not safe around here. Also, we're going to need to see some identification, the multicolored officer added as he stepped out of the squad car. The stranger's shoulders sagged as he let out a bored sigh. You know, I was hoping you Boy Scouts would take a freaking hint when it was handed to you. He started rubbing his left thumb and forefinger together, the skin turning a deep shade of purple and forming a tiny marble-sized ball between his fingers unseen by the cops. The officers were now on edge, the plaid officer slowly reaching for his sidearm. I've always been a pro at evading the authorities, but you two drips ended up breaking my perfect record. He turned to face them and lifted his fedora to reveal a man in his mid-30s with a lean facial structure, slick black hair gathered in a ponytail, and a scar running diagonally across his face. "I guess I'm slipping." The officers gasped in horror when they instantly recognized the man. "It sits you," the plaid officer exclaimed as he fumbled, yanking his pistol from his holster, as did his partner. "Your dash." The stranger flicked the ball at the squad car, and as soon as it made contact with the hood, it enveloped the car and the officer in a blinding explosion that engulfed both of the officers, killing them instantly. The stranger began twirling his hands in the air like he was conducting an orchestra as the vehicle burned along with the maimed bodies of the cops. "And a partridge in a pear tree," he sadistically sang before laughing heartlessly. "Well, that's 2 less pigs in the world." The stranger heard a gasp and glanced to his left to see a young high school girl standing at an intersection. The girl had a terrified look on her face with her hand clamped over her mouth. She then bolted in the other direction as fast as she could while taking out her phone to call for help until the left side of her throat was slashed open. The girl gurgled in pain as she clutched the side of her neck, blood spurting out from between her fingers. Her eyes darted over to the trenchcoat-wearing man, now standing a few feet away from her, twirling a karambit knife in his hands. "But wasn't he down the street a few seconds ago?" "Sorry, it's not in my nature to kill random people, but..." He then moved faster than the human eye could follow and slit the right side of her neck, spraying more blood across the sidewalk. "Loose lips sink ships, you know what I mean." He then shot towards her again almost instantaneously and sliced open her jugular, while also carving the initials C4 into her forehead. The young high schooler, who had done nothing wrong in her life, collapsed to the ground as blood flowed from the gashes around her throat, the light fading from her eyes. The stranger then strode past her corpse with a smile as his foot stepped into the red puddle forming around her. Rokuro Nomura, formerly known as the Semtex Hero C4 and now All for One's enforcer, continued on his merry way before activating his secondary quirk to sprint through the streets at blinding speeds, zipping through intersections in the blink of an eye. He was always thankful to AFO for giving him another quirk. He was putting it to far better use than a clock did. Kamino Ward League of Villains Hideout. Several minutes later, Twice took a long drag of his cigarette as he stared at the cityscape in the distance. Sitting on top of the roof of the League of Villains Hideout, or rather a repurposed bar, the multiplying villain turned his gaze up to the clouds above. So much had happened in the last couple of hours that none of the League members got a wink of sleep. Their television was broken when the Island explosion shattered the screen. Spinner volunteered to venture outside into the chaotic streets of Japan to procure a replacement. It didn't take long for the Stain fanboy to nab an undamaged flat screen from a looted electronics store and haul it back to their hideout. It was times like these Twice wished their phones had access to the internet and news sources, but they were strictly regulated to contact LOV members. Nobody in the League knew what was happening over on Island, but it was apparent that the vigilante, the same one who tore off Tamura's arm, was the culprit. Twice grew sick when he was the others watched the vigilante slaughter the Sabres on live TV before he threw a severed head at the camera, and he had no witty comment for that. Unsurprisingly, Toga was squealing in glee at the horrendous sight. After the explosion shook the whole bar, he excused himself to the roof to collect himself. Deciding that he had lingered on the roof long enough, Jean Bubagawara flicked the cig away, slipped his mask back on, and went towards the door that led back downstairs. He went through the exit and down the stairs to a hallway until he heard the telltale sounds of knocking coming from the back door a few feet away from him. Twice cautiously reached for his wristband and pulled out a long strand of razor-sharp measuring tape that he occasionally used as garrote wire. Whenever someone asked him why he used measuring tape of all things, he would confess that it reminded him of the times when he used to work as a tailor. He edged near the door and prepared himself for anything when he heard a series of rhythmic knocks on the other side of the door. He immediately recognized it as a secret knock that every LOV member was taught to memorize when entering a base of operations owned by them. To ensure that it was one of their own, Twice responded with another series of coded knocks. The person on the other side used knocks that were Morse code. Twice recognized the password, and the villain sighed in relief. It was one of their own. Twice unlocked the door and opened it to reveal Nomura standing in the doorway. "If it's cookies you're selling, we'll take the Thin Mints. If it's a cheap vacuum you're selling, you can take a hike." Twice spontaneously alternated between himself and his split personality. It's always a treat to see you answer the door. Rokuro smirked as he stepped inside and placed his coat and hat onto a rack. So what's been happening out there? I gotta know the deets. Twice asked as C4 walked past him. Well, it's pretty hectic out there so far. Cops and heroes are all over the place. Civvies are panicking, and the lesser villains are grabbing anything that isn't nailed down. C4 listed off as he and Twice walked down the hall. In short, everything's gone nuts, something you have in common with. Know what I mean? Oh yeah, I do. I'm just a wild and crazy guy. Twice bombastically agreed before noticing a small streak of red on C4's cheek. Say, is that blood? Or ketchup? This? He replied as he wiped the blood off his face. Oh, I just off 2 cops and some kid. Twice jumped back in shock. Why you what? Yeah, some cops held me up and a random high schooler was gonna rat me out, so I made sure they wouldn't tell any heroes I was in the area. C4 explained with a cruel smirk. He noticed the horrified expression Twice had inside. Come on, Twicey boy. The League has to try to remain hidden. We can't let everyone know where we are or know our plans. And besides, this is all for a better world for guys like us. He placed a hand on Jin's shoulder with a cheery smile. And that's what you and everyone else want, remember? A society that doesn't rely on attention whore celebrities for help, and one that doesn't throw guys like us to the curb if our quirks are seen as a threat. And you don't want to go through that kind of pain again, do you? Twice looked down and nervously twiddled his fingers together. I mean, no but dash. That's the spirit. C4 interrupted, patting Twice on the cheek. So where are the others? They're in the rec room. Spinner thinks he's a TV repairman. Twice pointed down the hall. Nice. C4 said he resumed walking down the hall until turning a corner. This left Twice alone in the hallway, dreadfully conflicted. Twice heavily disliked the current state of hero society and would want nothing more than the system to be torn down and rebuilt from the ground up with something better, but not through other people's deaths. Jiren swore to him that no one would be no deaths before he joined the LOV, but this was the first time someone in the League outright admitted to killing 3 people. Also, he did not like C4 at all. Not because he was a former hero, but because of what he did before becoming a villain. Twice shook his head and followed after C4. So maybe one of the members was a murderer, something he would have to bring up with Jiren, but surely none of his other friends in the League were killers too, right? Right? Come on, man. I'm getting antsy here. Muscular grunted as he tapped his foot. I'm doing the best I can. Spinner grumbled as he fiddled with the connections. I swear, they make these things harder to set up nowadays. Everyone waited for Spinner to finish hooking up their new TV within the League's break room. The room was fairly medium-sized with a large couch in the center, a pool table on the right side, and a table on the far left. There was also a bookcase, but no one in the LOV ever bothered to read any of the books. Muscular, Magna, and Mustard sat on the couch. Mr. Compress was seated at the table. Dobby leaned against the bookcase with his arms folded and Moonfish was over in the corner, drooling and mumbling incoherently. The only one that wasn't present in the room was Toga. C4 and Twice entered the room just as Spinner got done with the last plug. Okay, that should do it. Spinner dusted off his hands as he placed a pair of batteries into the remote. He tossed it over to Twice, who caught it out of the air. We now return you to our regularly scheduled programming. Roll that clip, Johnny. Twice said humorously as he turned on the TV via the remote. It took all but 2 channel changes to get to the news network. We currently have very little information coming from my island, but we'll inform you as soon as we receive an update. Twice decided to switch to a different news station in the hopes that there would be more info. No news coming from my island for the last 2 hours, leaving many to question whether or not dash. He changed the channel again. We have no information regarding the I-Island siege, but we'll be keeping you up to date on available emergency centers dash. He changed the channel one last time. For those currently joining us, we will keep you informed of any updates from our official sources reporting on the I-Island incident dash. Twice pressed the mute button after it became apparent that no other news station had any valuable information. Man, no one in the news knows a thing? Magna scratched her chin, her eyebrow raised. You'd think with all the chaos going on, they'd at least got something to blab about. It's the HPSC covering things up as usual. Mustard sighed, fiddling with the gas valves of the Stahlhelm gas mask sitting on his lap. They always try to downplay the truth whenever something doesn't go their way. Are you positive about that claim? Mr. Compress questioned behind his patterned mask. This does not appear to be an incident they can simply sweep under the rug. Yeah, I had to dodge patrolling cops and heroes all over Kamino trying to get a working TV. I doubt they're going to cover all this up. Spinner added, looking outside their broken window. You guys think we should start repairing the windows? I mean, the police might dash. Don't sweat it, Spinny. The cops in Kamino are on all for one's payroll. C4 assured him. He then snapped his fingers. Which reminds me, Curator and the Volcano Thieves got back from my island, and they relayed some info to me. Is that so? Dobby said with a grin, his interest piqued. What did Helmet Head and Hot Head have to say? They ought to cane you for that. C4 pointed at him. Anyway, the mission on I Island is a failure. The Steel Sabers organization has been wiped out. What? You're joking. Spinner almost jumped back in surprise as everyone's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. They're all dead. Yup. C4 nodded, drawing more shocked looks. Courtesy of our green friend. Wait, that guy killed them all. Magna blinked in disbelief. Bullshit. Muscular shouted. There's no way that's even friggin' possible. The Sabers were the best hero killers in the world. But we did just see him kill some of them on TV a while ago. Mustard gulped. Twice looked down at his feet apprehensively. He wasn't sure why anybody in the league looked up to those psychos, let alone Stain. He didn't like heroes as much as the next villain, but he certainly didn't want them dead. Gene decided to stay silent for now. Well, they were. Curator's never given me bad info, so I trust his word. He and the thieves are reporting back to All for One. Better start praying for them. C4 snarked. If I may ask, what of Wolfram and his men? Mr. Compress inquired. Oh, they're all dead. C4 replied carelessly. DD dead. As in, gone the way of the dodo dead. Twice gasped. Those guys may have been jerks, but they were still valued members of the LOV. Pretty much. Honestly, I'm glad they're dead. They bought us nothing but trouble. C4 laughed. Twice blinked several times at him in horror. Likewise. I was sick of those assholes talking shit about me behind my back. Magna seethed. I would have loved to crush those fucking assbanes with my bare hands. Muscular flexed his fingers as layers of muscle fibers began wrapping around his fingers. Looks like that vigilante prick beat me to it. Mr. Compress and Mustard nodded in agreement. Twice did a double between everyone, mortified at their complete dismissal of the death of their comrades. This had to be some kind of joke they were all playing, right? But they were still a part of the crew. They helped our butts out a dozen times before. Twice reasoned as desperately as he could, hoping to find some sympathy out of his friends. Honestly, they didn't feel like team players in the league and only helped us if it benefited them. Spinner reminded Gene. They weren't really our friends, Twice. I second that. Dobby yawned as he cracked his neck. Take our word for it, Twice. Wolfram and his crew were too slow and too stupid to be a part of the league. All for One should have kicked them out a long time ago. Well, they're kicked out now if you get my meaning. C4 winked at Dobby. This did not ease Jin's distress at all. To make matters worse, the VX gas bomb that was supposed to kill everyone on the island once we were done got disarmed. Gas bomb. Twice paled underneath his mask. As I said, can't let anyone know about what we're doing nowadays. C4 shrugged with a smile. Wish I could have been there to see it go off. The most deadly gas in the world. One day I'll command that kind of killing power at my fingertips. Mustard shuddered with glee at the thought of it. Twice was officially freaked out. He needed to find a way out of this conversation and out of the room now. He just needed to find a good excuse until he noticed that Toga wasn't anywhere in the break room. Say, does anyone know where Himiko is? Where is our darling little vampire pal? He rapidly asked while trying to stay as inconspicuous as he could. She went upstairs to her room a while ago. Mr. Compress answered as he pointed up to the ceiling. The poor girl was having another one of her headaches again. Thanks, I'll go check up on her. Gotta go fast, he hollered before running out of the room as fast as he could. Everyone was left staring at the empty doorway in silence. Muscular glanced at his comrades before settling in his seat on the couch and watching the TV. All right, I'm just gonna say what's on everybody's mind. He's gonna puss out on us. Spinner, Mustard, Magna, and were taken aback by Muscular's harsh words while Dobby showed no reaction. The horribly burned villain regarded C4 with a focused gaze. You really think Jin's up for this? C4 shrugged. He did just join the league a week ago, so he's bound to be a tad rough around the edges. Jiren put in a good word for the guy, but if he does start to show some hesitation dash. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Spinner stopped C4. Sure, Twice is new, but he's already committed to our cause. He just needs more time to warm up to how we do things here in the League of Villains. Plus, he's already become our friend. An accurate proclamation, dear Shuichi. Mr. Compress theatrically agreed as he sat up from his seat and posed stylishly. Twice simply has stage fright is all. If taught with grace and glamour, he'll be a peak performer before you know it. Magna was a bit weirded out by Mr. Compress, but she too came to her friend's defense. Honestly, Jin's quirk has been helpful so far, and he's a pretty fun guy to have around. Yeah, he's cool. Mustard nodded his head, giving C4 a thumbs up. Bite, bite, bite. Everyone heard Moonfish drone as the straitjacket-clad serial killer gnawed on the wall in the corner of the room. Must eat more to bite, bite, bite. Sharpened teeth to bite even more. Everyone's sweat dropped uncomfortably. Why the hell was this guy in the league? Right. C4 cleared his throat. If you guys can vouch for him, then I'll give him some time to adjust. Does anyone know where Kurojiri is? He's with All for One. Dabi answered. Smoghead recovered Shigaraki's arm and brought it back to the dock. C4 smiled at that bit of good news. Dr. Garaki was capable of anything, so reattaching Tamura's arm would be a piece of cake. That's great to hear. Is Shigaraki here by any chance? He's in his room. Magna said before her expression turned to worry. But I wouldn't go bothering him right now. I don't know if you've noticed, but this fiasco is kind of a big deal right now, so I need to go inform him whether he wants to listen or not. C4 gruffly replied. I get what happened to him fucked him up a little, but he's got to hear this. No, Rokuro, we're being serious. You do not want to dash. Spinner instantly stopped speaking when he saw someone standing at the break room entrance. The villains turned around to see that it was Tamura Shigaraki. He was clad in a black shirt and pants with a disembodied hand attached to his face, but the sleeve of his shirt was buttoned up where his left arm used to be. Silently, Tamura plodded into the room and towards the couch, which prompted the three villains to get up and move away from him. The news was showing a security camera playback of the vigilante's charge through the port of Tokyo. He placed a hand on the couch and stared at the TV. Out, Tamura commanded, glaring at the vigilante. The other villains did what he said and started to leave the room, but C4 did not budge. Tamura, I have important news to dash. Shigaraki tightened his grip on the couch, and the furniture turned gray before slowly disintegrating. Ooh, yud. He breathed heavily as he began to scratch his neck excessively. Needless to say, this didn't take much for the group to quickly vacate the break room, with Moonfish scampering out of there like a dog. C4 scowled in annoyance as he exited, which left Dabi as the last one out. As he walked out into the hallway, Dabi noticed something out of the corner of his eye. The TV was now showing new footage of the vigilante clotheslining Endeavor and slamming him into the pavement. Dabi's hand reflexively twitched as his eyes narrowed at the vigilante. After a few more seconds of staring at the screen, Dabi left Shigaraki to his own devices. The news report switched to a playback of the mall incident, and Tamura felt his anger rise with every passing second. He scratched at his neck harder and harder, blood dribbling down his neck and coating his fingers. The phantom pain of his missing arm was driving him insane, and no amount of morphine dulled the searing discomfort. The footage then paused to do a close-up of the vigilante's head. The way it was positioned made it look like he was staring at Tamura. Hate you, hate you, hate you, hate you. Tamura repeated his madness mantra over and over again through his clenched teeth. His eyes were wide with pure anger until he finally snapped. I hate you. Twice walked up the steps to the third-floor living quarters of the LOV members. As he neared the door to Toga's room, he paused for a second before slumping against the wall. Sweat poured down his face, and his heart thumped rapidly. To hear his friends dismiss the deaths of one of their own and learn that they were going to gas an island full of people was a huge blow to his trust in the League. Jiren told him that this was a noble group that wanted to put an end to the imperfect hero society that affected unlucky people like him. He didn't think the League going to such extreme lengths. He wasn't sure what to do at all. Should he talk to his friends more? Should he go to Jiren and ask him what was up? Should he try to get an audience with All for One and try to make some kind of appeasement for less violent methods? Twice gripped the sides of his head as he tried to calm himself down. The stress over this situation was dredging up bad memories of how he ended up the way he was. Jean grew embittered over the hurtful recollections of his past as he clasped his hands together. He was not going back to that chapter in his life. It's all for a better society. It's all for a better society. He repeated to himself, though he began to doubt his own words or if what he was doing was in the right. Looking towards Toga's door, Twice got back up and walked over to it. His hand was inched away from the knob when the door was suddenly swung open and smacked him square in the face. Toga's head popped out from behind the door as Jean lay flat on his back, spirals in his eyes. Whoops. Sorry, Jean. Himiko apologized as she knelt down and helped sit him up. You still alive? Yeah, dandy. It's a lie, V. He croaked as he shook his head to dispel the dizziness. How are you feeling? Much better. Toga answered happily. Just had to wait till those uncool headaches stopped bugging me. Twice felt nothing but concern for his friend. Toga was prone to painful headaches, once every few days apparently, and she had to be left alone until they subsided. He remembered the time when Muscular tried to poke her when she was having one of her headaches, and she went absolutely ballistic. It took him and several of the others just to try and pry her off of a man who was 10 times bigger than her. Hopefully, Jiren knew somebody who could supply her with some aspirin. So what's been going on? Toga tilted her head. Tell me. Twice scratched his chin. Well, that depends. Do you want the bad news? Or the really bad news? Spoiler warning. It's pretty bad, or not. To be continued. Chapter 25. Storm on the horizon. Island Airport Security Office. Several hours later, storm clouds formed in the sky as the sun began to set in the distance. The rescue efforts now shifted to evacuating the civilians off Island and back to the mainland, as well as having the unconscious heroes transported to a hospital. One by one, transport copters airlifted them off the island, but it was slow going. The same went for the investigative efforts of the HPSC agents. After recovering from the initial horror of seeing so much blood and dead bodies, they immediately gathered as much evidence as possible. Downloading security camera footage, inspecting the bodies, scanning hard drives, analyzing the damage done to the island, trying to trace the vigilantes' steps, and taking photos of anything that was deemed important. Heroes and military personnel were aiding in their investigation to the best of their ability, a lot of them curious as to how this happened. Back in the baggage claim security office, Aizawa had just finished retelling his account of how the vigilante barreled through the blockade back at the port up to how he single-handedly defeated a dozen pro heroes on his own to Yagi, Grant, and Mara. The three of them were left astonished and shocked over what they heard while the Erasure hero hung his head. Seeing the battered heroes the first time was one thing, but hearing a first-hand account of how they lost against the vigilante was another thing altogether. It was scary. Good God. Aizawa, I should have been there sooner to help. Yagi bemoaned. Not that it would have made much of a difference. Eraser had lamented with a shrug. Are you absolutely sure he was holding back? Sayaka pressed Yagi. Yes. I could feel him restraining himself behind those attacks. Every hit, blow, and punch. Yagi brought a hand up to his chest, feeling the painful bruises. His true strength is something I dread very much. And he literally crushed one of 13's black holes with his bare hands. Mara incredulously asked Aizawa. Shota nodded his head. We threw everything we had at him, and it didn't even faze him. And he was pulling his punches the entire goddamn time. He then got up from his seat and glared at the two HPSC officials. Listen, you two need to get on the horn and send out an all-points bulletin on this guy. We need every hero and officer on high alert, because if this psycho hits the streets dash. We can't. Not yet. Mara interrupted, getting out his phone. Why? Aizawa demanded. Mara held up his cell to show Aizawa a picture of the wall his forensics team sent him. Shota paled when he saw the bloody symbol along with the frightening message. If this gets out, everything changes. It's not about trying to guess what his next move is or warning everyone about how dangerous he is. It's about preventing a mass panic. Mara cautioned. Do you have any idea what'll be like if Japan and the rest of the world hears how a single vigilante wiped out the Steel Sabers, beat up multiple top-ranked pro heroes, and defeated All Might? God forbid any villains or gangs hear about this. They'd eat half of Mizudafu alive, with so many pro heroes out of action. On top of that, we still don't know anything about our vigilante. His weapons, his armor, The way he fights, nothing is adding up. He doesn't look or act like a prototypical vigilante to me. Sayaka added, drawing an incredulous look from Eraserhead. And what the hell does a prototypical vigilante look like? Do you have a photo of one lying around somewhere? Aizawa exasperated. Everyone please. Yagi got up from his seat. We all need to calm down. We can't tell the public what happened to me. All for one will take advantage of it. But we as defenders of the people at least owe them answers. We have to tell them what happened here because there is no feasible way you can try to spin this. He said to Mera and Sayaka, we can make a cover story about your fight with the vigilante, but if we let what happened here go public, we will see a massive uptick in villain activity. It'll be chaos, Yagi. Sayaka cautioned. I know, but the heat is going to come down hard on us no matter what. All we can do is come out with the truth and accept whatever happens afterward. Yagi said, knowing full well the implications of this decision. Aizawa was relieved that Yagi was willing to let the public at large know the truth about the events here on the island despite the risk it posed. Leaving out All Might's loss was understandable. Mera and Sayaka looked hesitant, unwilling at worst, about revealing the events that transpired here, but eventually nodded in acceptance. Yagi was right. They could assemble the best spin team they got, but it would make no difference due to the sheer insanity of last night's carnage. Sayaka's phone vibrated, and she dug it out of her pocket, flipping it open. Her expression darkened when she read the text. David Shield just arrived at a hospital back on the mainland. We need to have a serious discussion with him, and I think you should be there with us when we do. Sayaka informed Yagi as she put her phone away. Toshinori felt himself go rigid. It was going to be unbelievably difficult for him to talk to his friend with the HPSC hovering over his shoulder, but this had to be done. He had to confront David over his role in the Island siege regardless of his intentions. With a glum nod, Yagi and the others exited the security booth and walked through the empty baggage claim back downstairs. On the way down the stairs, Mera couldn't get his mind off of something. It kept nagging him to no end, and he had to voice his opinion on the matter. Do any of you think the others were telling the truth before? That the vigilantes saved their lives as well as the hostages? Mera asked. Yes. Yagi suddenly answered before anyone else could. He had no intention of killing me or anyone else that wasn't a threat. He spared the other heroes not because they were beneath him, but because he knew they were not the enemy. And from what Aizawa told us, he didn't even want to fight them. I truly believe that he saved many lives today, and while I can't look past what he did against the Sabers and the heroes, it does at least provide some insight into how he works. Sayaka, Mera, and Aizawa were silent, not knowing how to respond. While Yagi did bring up some good points, it only left more questions than answers about the vigilante. Little did they know that Yagi had developed a curiosity with the vigilante. He wanted to know how this man was able to defeat an army of pro-heroes and withstand his most powerful attack. Yagi had to understand the vigilante's mindset, or at the very least try to get him to tell him how he was so strong. There was no way that suit could give him the strength to surpass One for All. He needed to figure out the vigilante's quirk and which side the man was on. That is, until he was properly contained in the most heavily secured cell Tartarus could put him in. Only then could Yagi have a face-to-face conversation with him. We'll look into that possibility later. Let's just get off of this floating slaughterhouse. Mera sighed. The rest of the group nodded as they continued walking down the stairs. Island's central tower bottom floor lobby. Is this all of it? An HPSC investigator asked. This is all of the pieces we could find. Another agent replied. The stony-faced agent took off his glasses as he bent down. He and several others like him were tasked with gathering as much information and evidence as they could from the central tower, while several other teams spread out around the island assisting the heroes and soldiers. On a gray tarp lay the broken pieces of the vigilante's chainsaw that the other forensics had collected. Looking closer, the investigator in charge slipped on a pair of nitrile gloves and picked up a chunk of what used to be an engine for the saw. It looked to be a regular engine, but there was something off about it. It appeared to be too advanced to be part of just a regular chainsaw. He set it down and glanced at the saw chain, grimacing in disgust at the chunks of flesh embedded between the blades. The investigator turned his attention to the bar and wiped away the dried blood to get a better look at the logo that was imprinted on it. Mixum's Beavertooth Paintsaw, 30 inches close combat security. The investigator was deeply unsettled. What maniac company uses a chainsaw as a security weapon? The threatening beaver mascot next to the lettering was creeping him out as well. He shook his head as he set the bar down and stood up, taking his gloves off with a tired sigh. "Get this to our research division. It's not much, but at least it's a start," he said to one of the agents. "Look up what we can on this mixum. Hopefully, it'll give us a lead." "Understood. You should also know that we looked through the security camera footage of the vigilante, and we were able to make out 2 other names on his suit and weapons." The agent debriefed. "What do you have?" the investigator asked. The agent pulled out a small notebook from his suit pocket and flipped through the pages. "Let's see. I.O. Logistics Manufacture and Union Aerospace Corporation." The investigator raised an eyebrow before putting his glasses back on. These were companies he had never heard of, and the sooner they knew who they were, the better. "Run everything we got on these 3. We need to find out who they are and why they're supplying this psycho." Island Airport Main Terminal. Johnny Cashhurt slowed. It had begun to rain, with intermittent thunderclaps echoing from above as the raindrops washed away the blood in the streets and put out the fires. Though it did very little to assuage any lingering fears everyone on Island had. If anything, it only added a dreary atmosphere for the ruined research base. Evacuations off the island finally picked up momentum with more transport copters' arrival. Dozens of civilians were lined up in front of the transports, waiting to get off the island. Those that had to wait until they were called next spread themselves out around the main terminal of the airport. On the far wall of the atrium were the haggard forms of Class 1A and the Big 3. Izuku looked like a shell-shocked war veteran. His vacant eyes stared down at the floor as his arms lay limply on his lap. The last several hours had finally taken their toll on Midoriya's body. He was utterly exhausted and drained of energy. He slowly brought his hands up and stared at the flecks of blood staining his fingers. He became queasy when he thought back to all of the dead bodies he and the others had to walk around, not to mention the lake of viscera they had to wade through. Izuku took his focus off from his hands and inspected at the blood staining his shoes, feeling the wetness of his drenched socks, most likely colored red at this point. He balled up his hands into fists and clenched his eyes shut as tight as he could. His hands were trembling as he fought back the urge to burst into tears and tried his hardest to forget last night's nightmare. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes to find himself staring up at the ceiling as his vision came into focus. He felt his arms flop to his sides as he took several deep breaths, stifling a sob. He turned his head over to the right at Uraraka, who sat next to him. The girl was curled up in a fetal position, her head buried into her knees. Ochako was motionless, but Izuku could hear her breathing between pitiful whimpers. Frowning in sympathy for his friend, Izuku then looked to his left at the others. None of them were faring any better than Uraraka. Denki, Mineta, Kirishima, and Ida were silent, but they were shaking with fright, often jumping at the slightest noise. Jiro was slumped against Momo, who held her like a security blanket. Mirio shifted uncomfortably where he sat while his 2 friends, a girl with blue hair and a tired boy with pointed ears, did not look as traumatized as the others, but still had expressions of fright. Seated alone on the airport seats, not too far away from everyone else, was Bakugo. His eyes were completely shadowed by his hair, a frown adorning his face. Bakugo's posture was hunched over while his hands sat on his lap, his fingers occasionally twitching. Izuku had a pained expression as he gazed at his friend. The horror from last night and the revelations about All Might had all but left Bakugo an emotional wreck. Izuku had no idea how to approach his friend or even talk to him. There was nothing he could say that would ease the pain Bakugo was going through. Izuku looked away from his friend in shame before staring ahead at the forms of the pro-heroes lying on stretchers as they were tended to by paramedics. Many civilians were watching the scene, commenting on how shocking it was in hushed whispers. He felt his fingers curl up as he continued to stare at their unconscious forms. He had cataloged dozens of heroes in his journals during his spare time, and he knew the strengths and feats of every one of them. And yet, for all of their quirks and skills, it amounted to nothing when they faced the vigilante. Izuku couldn't even begin to imagine what was going through their heads when they witnessed an unstoppable berserker take them all down one by one. Even scarier was the fact that the vigilante was deliberately holding back. But what confused Midoriya the most was that the man did go out of his way to save people, protected him and his friends from certain death back on the roof, and even helped Maruko when she was badly hurt. But whenever he thought about the vigilante, all he could see in his mind was the monster in human form standing amongst a sea of flames. He shook his head to dispel the images as his heartbeat quickened in fear. Opening his eyes again, he noticed Shoto a few feet away from them. He was seated at the chairs as a paramedic bandaged up his wounds. Izuku took note of the tense expression Todoroki had and followed his gaze over to Endeavor, whose wounds were far worse than the other heroes. It was no secret to Midoriya that Shoto had a deep-seated resentment against his father, but there was no way to know what his friend was thinking as he glared at his unconscious parent. Izuku's eyes scanned the room for Melissa's shield, but she was nowhere to be found. Sadly hanging his head, he further slumped against the wall while lamenting his missed opportunity to talk to her sooner. He lifted his head a little and saw Yagi up ahead walking towards the exit with Aizawa, Mera, and Sayaka. Yagi noticed his cuckoo looking at him and came to a halt, exchanging forlorn glances. For a while, they just stared at each other silently without saying a word. Izuku was so drained of his usual exuberance that he couldn't muster a smile to reassure his mentor. Yagi could only nod apologetically with a saddened look on his face as he followed after Mera and Sayaka while Aizawa stayed behind. Gazing at his mentally scarred students, he felt himself die a little inside as he took note of how each one looked like they were about to break down into tears and occasionally jumped at the sound of thunder. If he knew something like this would happen, he would have taught them more about the potentially life-threatening risks of heroism way sooner. Aizawa heard an evacuation official announce the next group of people and watched as the UA students wearily got up and shuffled towards the door, disappearing amongst the crowd. The Erasure hero sighed in shame as he ran a hand across his face. He stood in place for a few seconds before exiting the airport. As he walked across the tarmac, he was greeted with the expanse of the ocean stretching out for miles and the setting sun out in the distance, casting an orange glow as rain poured from the clouds above. He spotted Hawks at a nearby transport copter waving him over. He went over and noticed Hawks looked far more tired than usual. There were no smart-ass wisecracks or witty banter from the wing hero, just grim silence. Giving a brief nod to the Hawks who gave a small wave, Aizawa went up the ramp into the copter where he saw Slide and Go, Yawabami, Kesajuriman, Wash, and Air Jet sitting at their seats. They were all quiet, staring at the floor with perturbed expressions. Far over in the back, Eraserhead could make out the curled-up form of Ragdoll. She was hugging herself tightly, eyes wide and darting around frantically as she shook like a leaf. He stared at her sorrowfully before sitting himself down next to Air Jet and slumped into his seat. Shota's eyes never stopped stinging after he tried using his quirk on the vigilante during his fight against All Might. He just wanted to fucking sleep. Hawks scanned the area for Maruko until he spotted her near another transport helicopter. She was staring at several soldiers stuffing the bodies of the steel sabers, or rather bits and pieces of them, into body bags and loaded them into the helicopter, which was crammed with body bags. Blood was seeping from the bags and carried an acrid stench of rot coming from the transport. Hawks immediately felt a chill go down his spine from the gruesome sight and slowly went over to Maruko, who had her back turned with her ears drooping. Hawks was heavily concerned for his friend, knowing that everything that had happened here today might cause Maruko to embrace her more violent tendencies back when she was Tiger Bunny. Hawks was praying that wasn't the case, remembering how he was able to encourage her to drop her vigilante identity and help her become a hero. He couldn't watch another person he cared for go down a dark path, not after what happened to his teacher, Lady Nagant. Hawks gently placed a hand on Rumi's shoulder. The rabbit heroine flinched in response. Maruko glanced over her shoulder at Kigo. He motioned his head to the copter behind them. Her features crestfallen, Maruko allowed Hawks to help walk her over to their transport due to her injuries. They entered the copter, and the first thing Maruko saw was Ragdoll laying on the seats at the far end, shaking and quietly sobbing. Rumi was about to go over and see what was wrong with her fellow hero until someone caught her by the hand. She glanced down at Yawabami, who pleadingly shook her head at her with a woeful look. Miruko lowered her head and turned away from Ragdoll, sitting next to Hawks as the helicopter took off. As she sat in silence, the only thing Maruko could think about was the vigilante. The massacre he inflicted upon the Sabers, his rescue of the hostages, and his fight against All Might kept replaying themselves in her mind. The one thing she could not understand was why the vigilante saved her life not once but twice. Why? On another helicopter, Izuku was seated next to Uraraka in the densely crowded transport. His thoughts on what happened had drowned out the thunder coming from outside. He felt Ochako scooch closer next to him, though she still kept her head down. Something inside Izuku stirred as he glanced down at his traumatized friend, as if his conscience was telling him to take action. Though initially hesitant at first, Midoriya slowly placed his hand on hers and gently patted it. Uraraka still kept her head down, but she did stop shaking. It was a start. Izuku sighed through his nose before turning his head to look out the window of the helicopter, staring at the ruined husk of Ai Island as it grew smaller with each passing minute. Kobe Hyogo Prefecture. Lady Nagant's hideout. Kana Tsutsumi paced around the abandoned office, deep in thought while ignoring the rain pattering against the windows. She had turned off her TV a while ago after it became apparent that there were going to be no new updates from Ai Island for a while. Nagant was currently brainstorming about her next course of action as she knew this catastrophe would lead to a surge in villain activity. Her main focus was the subject of the vigilante. Her gut instinct was telling her that the man had successfully wiped out the Steel Sabers and escaped from Ai Island, though his whereabouts were currently unknown. In her time as a vigilante, after she left her hero identity behind for good years ago, she had never encountered another one of her kind who was willing to get their hands bloody to protect people. So bloody that it would make fighting dirty look fair. That guy was someone she just had to team up with. If he was willing, of course. Kana smiled when she remembered how she was once approached by a group of vigilantes, the Narahata trio, a few years ago. They had offered her a place in their group to help the citizens of Japan, but she politely and respectfully declined. It wasn't because she disliked them. She truly saw that their hearts were in the right place, but she could tell they were too good-natured for the kind of work she did. Granted, Knuckle Duster was the most hardened out of all of them, but he didn't want Crawler or Popstep getting too deep into stuff they couldn't handle. Since then, Kana decided she was better off working alone. That is until she caught wind of the mystery vigilante scene at the Kyashi Ward shopping mall and his assault upon the Sabers. She went over to her laptop at one of the desks and brought up a map of Japan on the main screen. Tracing her finger from the ocean to the Japanese mainland, Kana wondered where the vigilante would end up. Since he was first spotted in Mizudafu, it would make sense for him to return to his original stomping grounds. If she wanted to meet this guy, she would have to travel from Hyogo all the way over to the Shizuoka Prefecture. It would be a pretty long trip, although she did have several disguises to wear to conceal her identity while out in public. She had also memorized the patrol routes of the police and heroes well enough to avoid detection. Her laptop suddenly brought up a tab informing her that she had an update from the dark web. Nagant regularly used the dark web with a hidden account so that she could monitor when certain illicit businesses from criminal groups popped up in Japan. When that happened, she would subsequently shut them down and eliminate those who are involved with them. Kana accessed the dark web and began to look up any new info, and she found her mark. A slave trading ring had opened up somewhere in Gatsu within the Shurmain Prefecture, along with 3 other rings that dealt in drugs, weapons, and prostitutes in Masuda, Hamada, and Izumo. Lady Nagant visibly seethed at the advertisement the ringleader put up for the slave ring. It sickened her to no end that an inhumane practice was still being used today, and it still kept slipping through the cracks. As usual, the heroes would have to make an investigation before they could take any action, but it took too painstakingly long, and it would be too late for those women being used as toys for the absolute worst scum imaginable. Closing her eyes and giving it some thought, Kana decided that meeting the vigilante would have to wait. There were people that needed saving and bad guys to kill. Shutting off her laptop, Lady Nagant went over to the abandoned break room, where she kept her gear hidden in a secret compartment behind the disused vending machines. She pulled out several metal cases which contained the essentials: a heavy duffel bag, some money, disguises for when she had to go out in public, spare hair ammo for her body weapons, flashbang grenades for when she needed to make a quick getaway, and a support item she had during her hero career. The boost boots, a pair of heavy white zip-up boots with an advanced propulsion mechanism in the heels and soles. They allowed her to jump to incredible heights, perform split-second doges, and even walk on thin air. After grabbing all of the necessary gear for her trip and putting on her boots, she grabbed one more item from one of the cases, a customized Beretta Inox chambered for .45 ACP rounds just in case she was in a pinch. As Lady Nagant loaded a magazine into the pistol, she took a long look at the weapon, scowling when she heard a familiar voice in her head. "Please, Kana, please don't do something you'll regret for the rest of your life." Staring at the gun for a few more seconds, Nagant holstered the weapon and double-checked her supplies. She then stashed the metal cases back into the compartment, moved the vending machines back in place, placed her equipment in the duffel bag, and left the room. She went through the abandoned factory and exited the building into the rain, ready to travel to the Shermaine Prefecture. Kana had no regrets concerning her choice. None whatsoever. United States of America, New York City. Times Square. The afternoon sun shone down on the Big Apple as an utterly massive crowd of people stared up at the massive jumbotrons surrounding them. Each of the screens showed a news report of the Island siege, though there was very little information they could supply the public with. Everyone in the city was glued to whatever screen they could park themselves in front of, desperate to know what was happening over there. The only thing they had to go on was footage of a psychopath dressed in green armor about to attack the Sabres with a chainsaw. The news cut out the resulting slaughter, and a small nuclear explosion coming from the island. Far away on the roof of a building near Times Square stood Star and Stripe, the #1 pro hero of America. Kathleen Bate watched the report for a few minutes before turning away and slowly walking across the roof. A regretful scowl formed on her face as she ran a hand through her hair in frustration. She should have been there. Had she known something like this would happen, she would have accepted that invitation to Island without a second thought. But someone had to stay back and take down a group of villains selling Trigger. She willingly volunteered. After SNS took down the drug ring with several other heroes and DEA officers, she heard the news that the Steel Sabres had established a foothold on Island and captured multiple hostages. What worried Kathleen the most was that most of her friends and All Might had been captured as well. And that is when he came along. A man wearing what appeared to be some kind of power armor attacked the Sabres on live television, much to her shock. For a while, news coming from Japan over the situation had been sporadic and misleading at best. No thanks to Tony Pope of Hardcore News blowing things out of proportion, as usual. It wasn't until her friend Clairvoyance, who worked at the FBI, managed to send her the full unedited video of the initial attack, as well as satellite camera footage from the Japanese branch of the HPSC to her phone. To say that she was horrified would be an understatement. All she saw was the man tearing his way through the Sabres in an utterly ungodly bloodbath. The weapons he was using were another subject altogether. She had never seen firearms that advanced before. Another one of Kathleen's friends, Rhodey Soul of the CIA, received the same footage from Claire, and he had the same reaction as her. The secret weapons investigation team over in Langley was unable to make heads or tails of his firearms. They said to Rhodey in an email, "Sane people do not build weapons like these." And it wasn't hard to see why. A rocket launcher with shrapnel-filled ordnance. An oversized sawed-off capable of blowing a man clean in half. A portable, highly destructive railgun. A minigun that could transform into a triple-barreled monstrosity. But the most surprising one of them all was a fully automatic energy weapon that could melt the skin off their targets. How in blazes did he get his hands on technology like that? Her thoughts went back to Yagi and wondered about the status of her hero. SNS was forever indebted to him for saving her and her sister back when they were kids. He was the reason she became a hero in the first place. They had met once when she was older and learned about the secrets of One for All and his nemesis, All for One. Kathleen was also well aware of Yagi's condition following his battle with AFO, and there was no way to know what his current status was. Looking upwards at the sky above, Kathleen sighed. "Please be safe, Yagi." Kaizugifu Prefecture. Gentle, and L.A. Brava's hideout. Gentle silently sipped his black tea, sitting alone at the kitchen table. He set the cup back down and stared down at his reflection in the tea. The last several hours had been harrowing for him and La Brava. They had been watching the new report of the Steel Sabres capturing Island for quite some time, right up until an armor-wearing vigilante sawed him down the middle. Gentle quickly turned the TV off just as a screaming La Brava ran upstairs, and he hadn't seen her come out of her room since. After he felt it was safe to turn the TV back on, Gentle nearly fell out of his chair when the news showed a massive explosion erupting from the island like someone dropped a bomb on it. He was glued to the news for the next 20 minutes before finally turning the TV off and making himself some tea to calm him down. If he was being truthful to himself, Danjuro Tabita absolutely despised the Steel Sabers. They were nothing more than a band of murderers and lunatics who loved to commit the most horrendous war crimes imaginable. The things they did to heroes were nothing short of sadism at its worst, to the point where he actually felt sympathy for those they killed. Even though Danjuro was a villain and had left his dreams of being a hero behind for good, he had standards. What intrigued him, however, was the fact this vigilante was the same one who attacked Tomura Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains, another group he did not wish to affiliate himself and La Brava with. But who was this mysterious vigilante? Why was he attacking the Sabers? What became of the hostages and the heroes captured on Island? Looking towards the stairs that led to the second floor of his dwelling, Gentle noted that La Brava hadn't come out of her room for a while. He poured another glass of tea from the still-hot kettle resting on the stove and walked upstairs to La Brava's room. He came to the door and lightly knocked on it. "La Brava, I have tea for you," he announced as bombastically as he could. But there was no answer. La Brava. Still nothing. Danjuro grew worried. "Manami." He knocked again. He slowly opened the door and peered inside his sidekick's sparse room. Her computer equipment took up the entire back wall, with only a bed and dresser situated near the windowsill on the other end. The room was dark, save for the computer screen casting a pale light across the room, though Gentle was able to make out a familiar streak of red near the dresser. Manami Iba was huddled on the ground in a fetal position, eyes wide with fright and shaking like a leaf. He immediately set the tea down on the nightstand next to the door and went over to her. "Manami, are you okay?" he asked, crouching down to her level. The young hacker shook her head as she stared ahead. No. I hacked into Island's security cameras." Gentle jumped back in shock. "You what?" "Manami, that's a government facility dash." "But just the cameras." "Just the cameras." La Brava jumped up as she assured Gentle. "I kept thinking that the only way the Sabers could have attacked Island was if they hacked the security systems. So I managed to hack the island's main server and access the cameras to find out what was going on." Her head lowered while her breathing hitched a little. They're all dead." "The hostages?" Gentle shakily breathed. La Brava shook her head. "No. The Sabers, he killed them all." Danjuro's eyes widened as he took a step back. "Bibi Baihu dash. The other heroes couldn't even stop him. I don't think even All Might stood a chance against him." La Brava continued. Her tone of voice was fearful. "Manami, get a hold of yourself. You aren't making any sense dash." Danjuro attempted to calm her down until she darted right past him towards the door. "I need to get some air. I need air." She quickly rattled off as she went out the door and disappeared into the hall after making a right. Gentle rushed outside her room, but she was already downstairs, and he could hear. He opened the front door. "Don't forget your disguise," he called after her just as the door slammed shut. Gentle was left at a complete loss. He had never seen her act like that in the time he knew her, and it was incredibly jarring. Looking over toward the computer in her room, Danjuro gulped apprehensively. Was she really telling the truth about what had happened on Island? Or did she over-exaggerate out of fear? His curiosity getting the best of him, Gentle went over to La Brava's computer and sat himself down. He saw several tabs with labels underneath them that were most likely cataloged footage from Island. Cameras Steel Sabers, 1 through 12. Cameras Endeavor Full. Cameras Heroes, 1 through 8. Cameras All Might Partial. Danjuro was starting to have second thoughts about this. He knew he shouldn't be poking around Iba's stuff, but he had to know what was troubling her. He took a deep breath and selected the first video to watch. To be continued. Chapter 26. Infirmary. "No. I ain't talking about that freak, alright? He's not here, is he?" "Scout, Team Fortress 2. Mizuta General Hospital. 3rd floor, 11:30 p.m. Izuku Midoriya stared up at the ceiling silently as several announcements were heard over the PA system outside his room. It had been a while since he and his friends arrived at the hospital. He went through the regular checkup procedures, including patching up his wounds, dressing him in a hospital gown, and placing him in a room. The same went for his friends who were escorted to their separate rooms and received their checkups. He was now alone, laying down on the bed, left to his thoughts. He turned towards the window and gazed at the cityscape beyond, making out several broken windows on the buildings. Izuku sighed as he eased into his bed. He could hear the clamoring of news reporters outside the front gates of the hospital, and he couldn't blame them. They were scared. They wanted answers. But how was the HPSC supposed to tell them that one man annihilated the Steel Sabers and defeated an army of pro-heroes? He really hoped that the news of All Might's loss against the Vigilante and his condition wouldn't be made public. He heard several knocks on the door, and it opened to reveal a nurse with a clipboard in her hands. "Mr. Midoriya, you have visitors who wants to see you." The nurse stepped back, and Izuku saw his friends standing outside the door. They had all been changed out of their clothes and wore hospital gowns like Izuku. The dress clothes they wore to the party probably needed to be disposed of due to the blood. They all filed into the room as the nurse shut the door behind them. Midoriya managed a weak smile. "Glad to see you're all okay." "We feel the same," Uraraka replied. The rest of the group shared her comforting smile. But Izuku could tell they were all extremely tired. "Where's Shoto and Bakugo and Mirio?" Midoriya asked. "Shoto's asleep. We didn't want to disturb him. Mirio and his friends were sent to a different hospital." Momo answered. "Bakugo doesn't want to see anybody right now." Izuku sighed as he hung his head. It didn't surprise him. A long silence followed afterward, with everyone awkwardly averting their eyes from Midoriya. They didn't know what to say. They were all so exhausted from the events that they didn't have the strength to muster up a conversation. The only thing running through their heads on repeat was the psychopathic vigilante butchering the Steel Sabers. None of them wanted to speak about the subject. That is until... "So, are we not going to talk about that maniac?" Mineta blurted out. Ida tensed up. "No, we're not, Mineta." But aren't you guys the least bit curious why he came here?" Mineta ignored Tenya, raising his voice. "And how was he able to beat up all those heroes?" Jiro hugged her arms, shivering as the horrific memories came back to haunt her. She grew sick when she remembered the vigilante decapitating one of the villains in the ballroom and sending a severed head flying onto her lap. Mineta dash. "Izuku, you said you met this guy a few days before, right?" Mineta turned to Izuku in desperation. "Who the hell is he?" "Stop it!" Denki suddenly yelled, startling Mineta and the others. The room grew quiet again as Mineta turned away, twiddling his fingers together with an ashamed look. Denki stared down at his feet while clutching his arm. The last thing he needed was to be reminded was the bloodbath he and his friends went through. "I don't know." Izuku whimpered as tightly clenched his hands around the blanket. His head still hung. "I honestly don't know who he is." Uraraka gently placed a hand on Midoriya's shoulder to calm him down. Everyone stayed silent again out of respect for Izuku until there was another knock was heard. The same nurse from before poked her head through the door. "Pardon me, Mr. Midoriya, but you have more visitors." She fully opened the door to reveal the rest of Class 1A standing in the hall anxiously. The others were surprised to see all of their friends gathered outside the hall. It was completely unexpected, but there were no complaints. The nurse allowed the students to quietly enter the room before closing the door behind them. As soon as she did, Mina let out a sob as she embraced Momo and Jiro in a tight hug. The two teared up and hugged her back as the others gave them some space. "How'd you guys know where to find us?" Kirishima smiled, happy to see his friends. "Oh, Jiro texted us a while ago. Told us where you guys were, and we came over here as fast as we could." Siro explained. "Had to beg our parents, though, but it was worth it. When the whole attack happened, all we could do was think about if you were all okay." Pyu held Uraraka's hands, relieved to see her. "We were so worried." Mina bawled as she continued hugging Momo and Jiro. Sato went over to Midoriya and set down a plastic bag filled with oranges near the edge of his bed. "I grabbed some of these from home before I left. Thought you could use some vitamin C. And I bought you some of my Gruyere cheese." Aoyama presented Izuku with a block of delicately wrapped cheese as sparkles danced around him. Sato's sweat dropped. "Thanks," Midoriya complimented, taking the cheese from Yuga. "After that hospital food, I could use something with more taste," he admitted as he started peeling one of Sato's oranges. "Have you guys been keeping up with the news?" Denki asked. He knew he shouldn't have asked that given their current emotional state, but the question came out by accident. "Yeah, we watched the Sabers make their broadcast right up until..." He came. Mizo gulped while Koji nervously fidgeted. "When he started killing them, we shut off the TV until it was safe to turn it back on. It was the same for us," Hagakure said. She lowered her head and anxiously rubbed her arm. Do you guys think our teachers were going to tell us about what happens if we face something like the Sabers? Or the vigilante? I mean, is that kind of violence going to be common when we become pros? Are we going to have to kill a villain if we can't stop them? Everyone was quiet. It was a question that lingered in the back of their heads when they first entered UA Academy. At first, they were so focused on their studies that the question never occurred to them. But now after the massacre on Island, they all wondered if they truly had what it took to face the harsh realities of heroism. But could they take a life? Tokoyami folded his arms and shut his eyes. Being a hero does not come without risks or difficult choices. We were going to have to face that fact sooner or later. Momo added forlornly as she and Jiro gently let go of Mina. Yuga let out a mirthless chuckle as he stared down at the floor. When you think about all those horror movies, you know that gore is just special effects or CGI. But earlier on the TV, when we all saw the real thing. Hey, Aoyama? Zero stepped forward. The petite boy was shaking now, his eyes quivering and rife with fear. Is that really what we look like on the inside? What we all look like, Dash? Aoyama. Zero exclaimed as he gently shook Yuga's shoulders. The boy glanced at Hanta, who gave him a pleading expression. Not now, okay? Aoyama nodded and looked away, feeling guilty that he brought up the subject of the carnage on live television. It seemed that whenever they wanted to talk about something, it kept revolving back to what happened on Island. No one knew anything else to say that wouldn't remind the others who went to Island of the horrors they witnessed. Once again, there was nothing but silence from everyone. Excuse me, you are not supposed to be here. Out of the way, Toots. The sound of a commotion from outside the door jostled the teens out of their depressive mood. Before anyone could wonder what was going on, the door to Izuku's room was suddenly kicked open so fast that it almost smacked Uraraka and Tsuyu in the face. Standing at the door was a cameraman and American reporter Tony Pope, clad in a gray suit and pants along with a tan fedora as he held a mic in his hand. There he is, a survivor from my island. Tony hollered. His cameraman was beside him as they barged into the room, bowling over Koda and Mineta in the process. Izuku uttered a confused yelp as Tony shoved the mic against his cheek as the camera was trained on him. Hey, what the hell, buddy? Kirishima yelled as he helped Koda up to his feet. Young man, can you tell us what really happened on Island? What happened to the Steel Sabers? Did the vigilante kill them all? What became of the heroes? Did All Might defeat the vigilante? Were there any civilian casualties? What's the estimated body count? Tony rattled off as he jabbed the mic in his face. Dash. Izuku stammered. He was having a very difficult time understanding the reporter because he was speaking English, a language that he only just started learning in present mix class. How dare you, sir? This is a hospital. Ida shouted as he chopped the air. Do you have any idea what my friend has been through? Leave him be. Shove it for eyes. Tony barked at him before focusing back on Izuku. Little boy, you hold the proverbial key to revealing the horrible massacre on Island. For the sake of everything sweet and good, you have to tell us. Come on, spit it out. Be a man. Be somebody, Dash. Tony's desperate rant was instantly cut off when several stands of white capture tape wrapped around his arm and the camera his stooge was holding. Class 1A turned towards the door, and their faces lit up with elation at the person standing in the doorway. Shota Aizawa. Aizawa was still wearing his tattered hero costume, though he did have some bandages wrapped around his arms. His eyes were heavily bloodshot, making him look scary as hell. Tightly grasping the capture tape and glaring at Tony wrathfully, Aizawa spoke to him in perfect English. You have 5 seconds to get that mic away from my student before I give you a colonoscopy with that camera. Tony felt his pants grow heavy as he slowly moved the mic away from Midoriya. Just as Aizawa retracted the tape, 3 security guards moved past him and promptly restained Tony and his cameraman. The two were now being roughly escorted out of the room, much to everyone's relief. Come on, let's go. Hey, Lego, I'm a member of the press. I have rights. We're so sorry, he managed to slip past us. Once they were gone, Aizawa turned to his students and rubbed his tired eyes. Sorry I couldn't come sooner. None of you should have to put up with people like him. Thank you, sensei. Midoriya stuttered. He wanted to say that it wasn't a problem, but he was just happy to see his teacher again. Aizawa smiled in response before regarding the others. Good to see the rest of you visiting your fellow classmates. Any idea where Shoto and Bakugu are? Aizawa asked. Todoroki is asleep right now, and Bakugu wants to be left alone. Uraraka answered while appearing crestfallen at the last bit of information. Oh man, it's really bad this time, isn't it? Sato's shoulders sagged. Uraraka nodded. Aizawa frowned. This was going to be a problem soon, although this behavior was expected after Katsuki learned about All Might's condition. He would deal with that later. In any case, having you all in one place saves me the trouble of contacting you one by one about an important announcement. Announcement? Mizo tilted his head. Aizawa glanced toward the door. You can come in whenever you're ready. The sound of tiny feet shuffling across the floor was heard outside the door, and a diminutive, white-furred, anthropomorphic creature with distinctive mammalian features wearing a black waistcoat with matching pants and a pair of orange sneakers entered the room. Principal Nizu. Class 1A exclaimed in surprise. That's right, Nizu happily said as he waved his paw at the students. Your principal has come to check up on you all. Let me just say that it warms this tiny little heart to see you safe and sound. He trotted up to Izuku's bed and looked up at the bandaged boy. I'm overjoyed to see you and the others are doing well. We at UA always look out for the well-being of our students. Nizu turned around to face the others and cleared his throat. It is fortunate that you are all gathered here, for it concerns UA as a whole. This caused everyone to look at each other worriedly. How did the Island disaster affect their school? Would they still be enrolling, or were their dreams as heroes over? Aizawa's expression did not change. I've been kept up to date with the situation on Island. Due to an alarming number of our staff currently incapacitated, I have decided to temporarily close UA until our teachers have recovered. All classes will be suspended until further notice, and regrettably, the training camp we had set up for your summer break has been canceled due to the Pussycats being out of action. Nizu explained. He noticed everyone sporting concerned expressions, but he was quick to ease their misgivings. But fret not. You'll still be enrolled at UA and classes will resume once the staff returns. This eased whatever worries the students had, but Nizu wasn't done yet. However, your teachers will be engaging in an important discussion with you all concerning the events at Island. For those who went there, I will have a private meeting with you. Izuku and Uraraka glanced at each other worriedly, while Ida, Momo, Denki, Kirishima, Jiro, and Mineta did the same. But know that none of you are in trouble. There are just several important things we have to talk about. But we won't be discussing that right now. All of you have been through a lot, and you need time to recover. The safety, health, and welfare of the student body are a top priority at UA. Nizu assured them delicately. With that being said, those who are visiting, go home and use this time to review your studies or anything else you learned from your final exams. Those admitted here with injuries, go back to your rooms and get some rest. You'll need it. Aizawa advised his class. He also needed rest after the hell he endured on Island, and Lord knows his students needed it too. As much as everyone hated to leave so soon, their teacher had a point. One by one, they all said their goodbyes to each other, with some hugs for Mina, and left while others returned to their hospital rooms. Before heading out herself, Uraraka gave Izuku a heartfelt smile and said, "Get well soon." Izuku blushed in response as Ochako left the room. "Aw, young love," Nizu humorously commented, causing Izuku to turn red and Aizawa to gag. The principal left the room, and Shota started to follow him until... "Sensei, wait." Izuku called out to him, making Aizawa stop. Something had been gnawing at the back of his mind ever since the Yagi revealed his secrets back at the airport. If his teacher was already aware of One for All then. Back when we had the quirk apprehension test, when you told me I didn't have control over my quirk, did you already know that I had One for All? Izuku questioned. Aizawa still had his back turned to him. Shota's shoulders sagged as his head dipped downwards a little. He then let out a long, drawn-out sigh. "Yes, I did. Had to make sure you were ready to carry the burden." This came as a shock to Izuku. Not only because his teacher knew about OFA and was secretly testing him, but he actually saw the quirk as a burden. Aizawa then left the room, leaving Izuku to think about his teacher's words. But at this point, he was too tired to think and laid back in his bed, ready to let sleep finally claim him. Oh, one more thing. Nizu popped up outside the open door, startling Midoriya. "You have one more visitor." At first, Midoriya appeared exasperated, but his eyes widened in surprise at the person coming into view. Mom. It was Inko Midoriya. shaky hands clasped together and tears streaming down her face. It took all but 3 seconds for her to leap clear across the room, latch onto Izuku in a bone-crushing hug, and unleash the floodgates. My babe bibi. Inko bawled as literal geysers of tears gushed from her eyes. Izuku couldn't fault her for her overreaction. She was probably glued to the TV watching the Island siege and fearing for her son's life, especially after that gigantic explosion. Izuku hugged her mom back, happy to be in his mother's arms as she continued to sob. As Nizu smiled warmly at the touching scene, Shota quietly closed the door. But then they had to back away from it when a steady flow of tears pooled underneath the door. I wonder if that's a quirk. Nizu commented in curiosity. Could be. Aizawa shrugged. Muzutafu General Hospital. 4th floor. Adorned in a hospital gown, Maruko silently stood at the window of her hospital room as she stared at the starry night sky. The rain had stopped hours ago, though droplets remained on the glass, steadily dripping down the glass and adding a sense of calm for the rabbit heroine. After a few seconds of stargazing, she walked back over to her hospital bed and flopped down face first onto her pillow. She rolled over and looked at her bandaged arms and legs which covered her wounds. At first, she smiled, knowing that all those scars would make her look badass. But then Rumi frowned when she remembered the vigilante helping her back on Island. Ever since that mall incident, she had been reliving her past memories as Tiger Bunny on a regular basis. Every encounter with the vigilante and every bloody scene of ultraviolence kept giving her more flashbacks. As much as she hated being reminded of her violent past self, she pined to return to her old ways where she was unrestrained by the law and could let herself loose. But she remembered the promise she made to Kigo and did her best to put those temptations to rest. But what was driving her nuts to no end was that she couldn't stop thinking about the vigilante. His armor, his weapons, his strength, his motivations. The man was an enigma. Sure, Hawks pointed out the theory that the vigilante wanted to save the hostages, but they still knew nothing about the man's identity. The sentient AI he had with him only creeped her out further. What was stopping that thing from going full-on Skynet? And yet, despite everything, he saved her life on multiple occasions. Rumi sat back up and scratched her right ear. What was that guy's deal? Was she just a helpless maiden in distress to him? Maybe she was overthinking that last part. She sighed as she sat cross-legged on her bed, deep in thought over the whole ordeal. All she wanted to do was get out there, track that nutcase down, and find out who he was and why he saved her. All Maruko wanted is an honest answer from him. There was a knock on the door, and it opened to reveal Hawks, still in his hero costume. I figured you'd still be up. I was restless. You seemed to be up, and it emmed. Maruko replied with a smile. Actually, I'm about ready to doze off. Thank goodness this place has a coffee machine. Hawks playfully waved his hands. That's no excuse to deny yourself a decent night's sleep. An irritated old voice came from behind Kigo, causing him to wince. Shuffling past Hawks was Chiyo Shizenji, aka the youthful heroine recovery girl. She was an elderly woman in her mid-70s wearing a white lab coat with a red and yellow dress that was held by a metal belt that bore a pink R-shaped buckle. She wore a pink helmet with a dark purple visor, had her hair done up in a bun, and walked with a cane resembling a cartoony syringe. Oh, come on. Don't act like you don't chug down a couple of cups during the night shift. Maruko retorted before giving recovery girl a smug grin as she approached her bed. And besides, I don't need coffee thanks to my constantly energetic rabbit nature. I can keep going and going and going dash. Rumi's boasting was cut short when Chiyo whacked her cane against the rabbit heroine's knuckles, causing her to yank her hand back. Ow. What the dash? Maruko clenched her stinging hand. Don't get smart with me, missy. Chiyo snapped as she pointed her cane at her. This is the 8th time this month you've been admitted to a hospital, with injuries that you so obviously neglected to avoid, I might add. What part of dodging an attack isn't getting through your thick skull? Maruko stared bug-eyed at the irate elder before glancing at Hawks, who was leaning against the wall with his arms folded. Don't look at me. You're the one who's acting like a smartass. Chiyo glared at Maruko for a couple more seconds before letting out a sigh and switching to a saddened frown. Honestly, you poor thing. Why must you constantly push yourself like this? Rumi felt terrible for making the old lady sad and felt a little annoyed by getting called out on her antics again. Still, she didn't want to see recovery girl like this, so cut to the chase. So, Did you come to give me a checkup? At the insistence of your friend, yes. Chio replied. Sit a bit closer so I can get a better look at you. Maruko scooched up closer to the edge of her bed, while Recovery Girl pulled up a chair from the corner of the room. Chio carefully undid the bandages around Rumi's limbs and dispensed them in a medical waste bin. She then inspected the sealed-up wounds around Rumi's arms and legs carefully, examining every inch of her as she did. Recovery Girl continued her diagnosis for several more seconds until she took a step back with an astonished look. This is astounding. The wounds have healed up so perfectly I don't need to use my quirk on you. Chio marveled. Thank God. Maruko inwardly thought in relief. That thing Chio did with her lips made her flesh crawl. Is that so? Hawks tilted his head as he walked over. Those medical instruments are a lot more advanced than I thought. What do you mean by that? Chio inquired. Well, back when I got hurt on I-Island the Vigilante Dash, Maruko started before Chio cut her off. Wait, the Vigilante? The one that's all over the news. Chio raised an eyebrow. Yup. He brought me into a lab and used some high-tech tools to patch me up. Maruko finished before taking a closer look at the scars on her arm. Did a pretty good job, too. Recovery Girl took a closer look at Maruko's wounds again. This level of tissue regeneration is nothing short of incredible. I've heard I-Island had been making considerable progress in terms of medical technology, but this is still amazing work. Unless, of course, she snapped her fingers. Something we should know? Hawks asked. A few months ago, some officials from I-Island came to me with a proposal that they could potentially create surgical inventions based on my quirk. I agreed and called up a friend of mine who used to craft support items for me back in my glory days. Chio explained. Together, we drafted blueprints of said inventions and submitted them to I-Island's R&D department. It's been a while since I last heard an update about the project from them, but if what you're saying is true, then they were able to successfully create working versions of our proposed inventions. At least that clears up one mystery. Hawks grinned. Recovery Girl chuckled. I'd say they're in pretty good hands. I-Island may be in a sad state of affairs, but I'm confident that someday the project will be picked up again in the future. Maruko flexed her arm a little, smirking at the feeling of her strength returning to her. Say, was there any other reason why you agreed their offer? She asked out of curiosity. Because, Rumi, none of us stay young forever. Give or take a couple of years. I'll be too old to continue being a hero. There was a pause in the air as Maruko and Hawks sadly knew this was all too true. But until there comes a time when someone with a quirk similar to mine takes my place, we'll use those tools as substitutes. But they are very handy substitutes, so there's no need to worry. That provided some measure of comfort for the two heroes as Recovery Girl headed for the door. I need to go check up on the other patients. Do yourselves a favor and get some rest. Chio left the room and Hawks plopped himself down on the seat next to Rumi's bed. So, hell of a night, huh? Maruko rubbed her tired eyes. You can say that again. If there's one silver lining to all this, no innocents got killed. I'd call that something of a win. Higo opinionated. Yeah, and the Steel Sabers are dead. Glad those sick bastards are finally gone. Maruko seethed with a particular amount of venom at the last part. Hawks uncomfortably winced. He was afraid this behavior change would happen eventually due to the extreme violence she kept being exposed to. He decided to quickly change the subject. I checked up on our friends and the other heroes earlier. They're going to be fine. Recovery Girl worked her magic, and they'll make a full recovery soon. The same could not be said for Endeavor, however. Out of all of the heroes who were beaten by the Vigilante, he received the worst wounds from him. Chio used her quirk on him to accelerate the healing of his wounds, but it was still going to be a while before he regained consciousness. Good to know. Maruko nodded. Her features became sullen. 48 of us. 48 of us, including All Might, couldn't take that guy down. I know. It's honestly pretty scary. Hawk sighed as he shook his head. It was kinda awesome. Maruko slowly began to smile. Higo stared at Rumi, mortified. What? I mean, he beat 48 pro heroes and All Might all by himself. Just how crazy strong is he? Maruko rambled, becoming increasingly more excited by the second. I don't know what kind of quirk he has that made him so strong, but holy crap, that guy is something else. When was the last time someone could take on All Might and win? I gotta know more about this badass. He dash. You do know that you're praising the guy who put all our friends and colleagues in the infirmary, right? Hawks cut her off. having grown disturbed by her apparent admiration for the vigilante. Maruko stopped smiling as she realized what she was saying. Well, yeah, most of them still unconscious. Hawks continued, never taking his eyes off her. Okay, I get it, but he held himself back. Maruko quickly responded. He didn't want to seriously hurt them, Dash. But what if he didn't want to incapacitate them? What if he wasn't feeling merciful? What if he decided to kill everyone in all might? Would you still think he's awesome? Hawks finished, the cold look and tone of his voice borderline uncharacteristic with his normally laid-back attitude. Rumi was at a loss for words. She tried to defend herself, but she couldn't think of any way to convince her friend that she wasn't sounding like a lunatic. Rumi could only avoid Kigo's heated gaze as her ears lay flat against the side of her head. Hawks shook his head as he got up from his seat. All right, I'm going before this gets any more uncomfortable. Get well soon. He left the room and closed the door, leaving the rabbit heroine all by herself. The rabbit heroine stared at the door with an unreadable expression. Maruko did not get angry or vent her frustrations by breaking something. She just laid back down and calmed herself down. She got herself comfortable and closed her eyes. Rumi needed to get her head screwed on straight, and the first thing she was going to do when she would be released from the hospital was to find that vigilante. She screwed up the first time around by not questioning him sooner, and she was going to thoroughly interrogate him when she caught him. Maruko groaned when she realized that would be a stupid idea. If All Might and a dozen heroes couldn't stop this guy, then what chance did she have? But one way or another, she was going to get answers from him. Maybe that'll stop her from constantly thinking about him and admiring him for some messed up reason. Maruko opened her eyes when it was clear that she was too spun up to get any sleep and stared up at the unfamiliar ceiling. I wonder if this is how it feels to be that wimpy kid from that old robot anime. Maruko said to herself. She turned her head over towards the window out of boredom, and she immediately noticed something. From her window, on the left side of the hospital building, she saw someone slowly walk past the hallway windows. The person was a woman dressed in the same blue gown Maruko wore and had her head hung low as she plodded down the hall almost lifelessly. Maruko sat up when she recognized the person's green hair. Ragdoll. She watched Ragdoll enter a supply room and close the door behind her. Maruko felt something was seriously wrong with Tomoko. Ever since she saw her back on the helicopter leaving for my island, she never got the chance to ask anyone what was wrong with her. Taking note that Ragdoll was on the same floor as her room, Rumi got off of the bed and peered out the door. There was nobody around, so Maruko quickly walked out into the hallway and navigated her way over to where Ragdoll was a few seconds ago. Maybe she could try to help her, or at least try to understand what happened to her. Hawks trekked through the hall with his hands in his pockets. Though he had no destination to speak of, he stopped and slumped against the wall with a regretful frown. He fucked up. He shouldn't have just written her off and walked away. He should have talked to her more, or at least try to guide her back on the right path. Kigo silently cursed to himself as he covered his eyes. The lack of sleep and everything he endured on Island had affected his thinking process pretty badly. After he got some shut-eye, the first thing he was going to do was talk to Rumi more to help snap her out of her tiger bunny mindset, and then apologize for leaving her like that. Kigo helped Rumi bury her tiger bunny persona 11 years ago. He wasn't going to watch her turn into a vigilante again. Speaking of whom, where did that guy go after the battle? Ah, Kigo. So glad to see an alumnus from UA. Kigo was briefly startled by a tiny voice approaching from the left along with footsteps. Hawks glanced down the hallway to see Nizu and Eraser head walking towards them. The wing hero flashed them a grin. Good to see my old principal here of all places. He bent down to shake Nizu's paw. Surprised seeing you here too, Eraserhead. How you feeling? Like I want to fall over and slip into a coma, was Aizawa's gruff response. Heh, likewise, Hawks admitted, feeling just as tired as Shota. I've heard Ms. Usajiyama was admitted here as well. How is she? Nizu inquired. Oh, she's doing fine. Energetic as always. Hawks answered, leaving out certain details. Aizawa was quick to pick up that Kigo wasn't telling them everything, but was too tired to ask why. Now, Kigo, I've been told by Aizawa that you and Rumi have been briefed on Tashinori's condition and the enemy he faces. We normally don't let too many heroes in on this secret, so I'm hoping you two keep this on the down low, so to speak. Nizu requested. No need to worry. Kigo raised a hand. It's still a lot to process, but our lips are sealed. What's going to happen now? Aizawa sighed. The HPSC is still assessing the damage, and the number of pro heroes hospitalized means we're going to be short-handed dash. Everyone. The group suddenly heard Recovery Girl yell. They snapped their head around to witness Chio, along with several orderlies and a doctor, running towards them as fast as they could. Have any of you seen Tomoko? She frantically asked the men as she and the others stopped before them. Why? What's wrong? A confused Nizu questioned. Tomoko's gone. She was supposed to be in intensive care, but she attacked one of the nurses and ran off. Chio revealed fearfully. Kigo and Aizawa regarded each other with dread. Ragdoll's sudden mental breakdown was still fresh in their minds, but they did not think it would get this bad. Nizu was stunned to hear that. No, that can't be Tomoko. That sweet woman wouldn't hurt a fly. That simply couldn't have been her. He reasoned. But she did. A doctor confirmed. But that's not the worst part. She managed to steal a dash. In that instant, a shrill scream echoed down the hall along with the sound of something getting knocked over. Miruko's back and his shelving unit hit the floor hard as a frenzied Tomoko pinned her to the ground. She barely had enough time to catch Ragdoll's hands, stopping the scalpel from puncturing her eye. To Rumi's confusion and shock, Ragdoll was slowly overpowering her even though she was more physically built than her. Ragdoll's once cutesy, innocent face was now a visage of complete insanity. Her bedraggled hair draped in front of her now wide eyes. Her pupils were like pinpricks. Tomoko had both hands around the scalpel as she forced it down towards Miruko while heavily breathing through her clenched teeth. Ragdoll, please stop. It's me, Miruko. Rumi desperately shouted as she tried to force the scalpel away from her. No, you won't take my eyes. You won't take my eyes. Tomoko screamed in terror and rage. The tip of the blade inched closer and closer, dangerously nearing Rumi's eye as she struggled with the now insane heroine. She couldn't kick Ragdoll off of her due to the risk of seriously injuring her due to her powerful leg strength. She strained against Ragdoll's unnatural strength as the blade of the scalpel was now inches away from her eye, until multiple strands of capture tape wrapped around Ragdoll's hands and yanked them away from Miruko's face. More strands coiled around the green-haired mental case. She was flung into the closest wall as the orderlies and the doctor rushed into the room. Hold her down. I need to sedate her. The doctor yelled as his finger transformed into a syringe. The orderlies held down the hero's right arm as the doctor jammed the finger syringe into her wrist, and it automatically pumped sedatives into Ragdoll's bloodstream. Tomoko struggled against her restraints before she finally went limp. Miruko sat up and looked towards Eraserhead entering the room along with Recovery Girl, Hawks, and the principal of UA, Nizu. Miruko watched the orderlies and the doctor haul the motionless woman out of the room, slowly reaching up to her face as a chilling realization set in. Had Eraserhead been a few seconds too late, Ragdoll would have gouged Rumi's eyeball out. Hawks was at her side, helping her up as gently as he could. Hey, you alright? Miruko nodded as Nizu approached her. Rumi, my god, what happened? I saw Tomoko out in the hallway from my room, so I went to check on her. I found her huddled in the corner doing something, and as soon as I tapped her on the shoulder, she goes ballistic. Miruko recounted. She was trying to stab my damn eye out. What the fuck happened to her? She rounded on Aizawa and Hawks. We're not sure. When the other heroes and I were traveling to Eye Island, I asked Ragdoll to use search to find you. But when she located the vigilante, she just started screaming her head off. Hawks revealed. Kept saying it came from hell over and over again until midnight knocked her out. Miruko and Nizu processed what they learned with confusion. They never heard anything like that happening to Tomoko's quirk. Did the vigilante have something to do with it? What could he have done to cause Ragdoll to snap like that? This is most concerning. Nizu surmised. The vigilante must have some form of quirk that blocks any scanning type power. But that doesn't explain this sudden irrational behavior from Tomoko. Hate to burst your bubble, but we think this guy might be quirkless. Aizawa said, eliciting astounded looks from Rumi and Nizu. He has no quirk. Miruko exclaimed. Nizu's mouth hung open. But that shouldn't be possible. That is unless his suit has something to do with Dash. Oh my goodness. Everyone heard Chio whisper in fear. The group turned toward the other end of the supply room, where they saw Chio staring at something on the wall. They all walked over to get a better look, and everyone gasped. Messily etched into the wall was the symbol of the vigilante. That's the same thing the vigilante drew back on Island. Maruko jabbed her finger at the symbol. Nizu went over and took a closer look. She drew this. He wondered as he looked over his left at the scalpel lying on the floor. But how did she know about this? Ragdoll never set foot on Island. She doesn't even know about this symbol yet. Hawks tried to make sense of this disturbing reveal. She drew something else. Azawa noticed on the far wall. Everyone glanced over their shoulders and was in for another disturbing sight. A scrawled drawing of the vigilante, wielding a giant sword and some kind of comically oversized gun standing atop what appeared to be a mountain of skulls. But what caused their blood to run cold was the message at the bottom of the drawing. Theon lighting Thayfurishim, Theon lighting Thayfurishim, Theon lighting Thayfurishim, Theon lighting Thayfurishim, Theon lighting Thayfurishim. Everyone could only gaze upon the chilling scrawlings in total silence. It was one of the most unnerving, disturbing things they had seen in a very long time. Who the hell is they? Maruko broke the silence. No one answered her. Nizu suddenly donned a resolute look on his face as he dug out his phone and started taking pictures of the draws. I'm sending these over to Sir Nightai. Maybe he can make sense of these scribblings. But isn't he over in Ireland? I heard he's helping out with a big case. Aizawa pointed out. True, but once he's done he'll probably head back home to aid us in our investigation of the vigilante. Nizu reasoned hopefully as he pressed a few buttons. Recovery Girl went over to the scalpel on the floor and picked it up. I need to go tend to Tomoko and re-evaluate her mental condition. As for you, Dash, I know, get some rest. Maruko groused in annoyance. The group left the room with Hawks and Maruko hanging back. Are you sure you're going to be okay? Hawks patted her back. Yeah, I'm just going to head back to my room and sleep now. Maruko muttered, still shaken after what happened with Ragdoll. Hawks nodded sympathetically as he went to the door and left. Before leaving, Maruko glanced at the drawings on the wall. What the hell did the vigilante do to Tomoko? And was Eraserhead really telling the truth about him being quirkless? What were they up against? Feeling herself grow weary with exhaustion, Maruko shuffled out of the room. She then thought about the message underneath the picture as she returned to her room. Did Tomoko mean the villains feared him? Or was it something else? To be continued. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, and share.